blonde guy starts the conversation by calling out to gazes. The woman in the witch hat chimes in saying it's not that they actually dislike him or anything like that, but things are different now. The leader shows off their new status, explaining that they've finally become an S-rank party. He tells Gaze that they need to graduate from having to protect an item master like him during their battles, which leaves Gaze standing there in shock. He looks at his friends and asks if this is really what he thinks it is. With a nervous smile and sweat running down his face, Gaze asks if this is the part where he officially gets fired. The blonde guy doesn't hold back at all. He gives a smug look and confirms that, to put it bluntly, yeah, that's exactly what's happening, while the rest of the group stands behind him, looking like they're ready for their new life as elites. The tavern stays loud and crowded as the weight of the news starts to sink in for Gaze. Gaze looks down at the table, his eyes shadowed as he repeats the fact that he's actually being fired, thinking about his position and how he's just seen as a starter-class itemist to the people he trusted. Gaze stands there, feeling completely crushed. He really thought he was actually doing something useful for the party, but looking at them now, he admits to himself that things had been getting pretty awkward lately, and it turns out everyone else in the group was already paired up in couples, leaving him as the odd man out. Gaze puts on a fake smile and tells them he understands. Finally giving up on trying to stay with them, he thinks about how they've finally hit S-rank and figures he can probably make it on his own, so maybe this really is the right time to go. While holding on to the party's rank plate, he considers just heading back to the countryside to look for some normal work. Before he leaves, Gaze asks what he should do about all the shared party items he still has in his inventory. The blonde leader looks totally annoyed and tells him he doesn't want any of it. He just tells Gaze to drop it all off at the mansion. The witch gives him a look and says he's being such a worrywart, while the knight just gives a casual thumbs up. At least he wasn't as bad as some guy named Goljan, and tells him he was actually a good man. The witch gives him a warby-to. The witch gives him a wave and says they should meet again if fate allows it, while the knight gives a thumbs up. The knight tells him to stay warm, and the priestess admits she's going to be lonely, telling Gaze to take care of himself. Gaze just gives them a gentle smile and tells the whole group to take care. The party stands there watching him go. Gaze raises a hand for one last wave, walking off into the quiet city streets alone under the night sky. For a second and tells himself it's time to get moving, because there's still a lot of work left to finish thinking about all those shared party items he's still carrying and how he needs to drop them off at the mansion. He actually starts to wonder if all the gear he has is even going to fit inside the place. But there's also the matter of the Draconic's mounts that still need looking after. He'll do one last job for them by cleaning out the stables and changing the feed before he officially calls it quits. Gaze starts walking away, but he can't help feeling a bit worried about a lot of things, wondering if his old party is even going to be okay without him there to handle the gear. He stands in the middle of the street for a second, just thinking about everything in silence. Then he just shrugs it off and screams that he's finally free, throwing his hands up like he just won the lottery. The story takes a weird turn as a narrator box tells the readers they probably know where this is going, expecting some typical exile story or a big social drama to start unfolding. The narration keeps going, and people are probably waiting for Gaia to make some huge comeback. But it turns out the readers are totally wrong about how this story works. Back at the mansion, the party leader is smirking to himself, saying that's one job finally finished. Looking pretty happy with himself and saying he's just glad Gaze didn't lose his cool and fly into a rage. The party leader kicks back with a smirk, casually mentioning that Gaze was actually a pretty decent guy. But Hannah looks down at the table, beginning to wonder if exiling him was actually a bad move on their part. She tries to brush it off, saying it couldn't be helped since Gaze was just a low-level item master with zero ambition. And since they've finally made it to S-rank, she feels like they just couldn't have someone like him holding them back. The party leader jumps in to kill the mood, telling Goljan and Hannah that there's absolutely nothing to worry about. He laughs it off, insisting that cutting Gaze loose was definitely the right choice for everyone involved, even asking the girls if they really think Gaze would want to see them looking all depressed like this. Golgan raises his drink and agrees that Gaze was a great guy, then turns to Licia to see what she thinks. Licia nods along and says, of course he was, but she's already moving on to something else, quoting some famous line about how every new beginning should start with a massive feast. Licia keeps the energy up, saying they should follow their predecessors and celebrate this new start in total style, and the party leader is all for it, flashing a huge grin while telling her she's absolutely right. They show off their new S-rank cards, they got yelling about finally hitting the top and starting a new chapter for the Crescent Claw. Everyone grabs their drinks and slams their mugs together, shouting cheers as beer flies everywhere, while the group divides into a massive feast to celebrate their big promotion. Eating their fill, the party starts the journey back to their home base. But when they finally show up, they find a giant mountain of monster parts and junk piled against the wall. The whole group just stands there with their mouths open, completely shocked by the mess, blocking their front door, looking at a massive heap of dragon scales, old armor, and rare crystals just left out in the yard, leaving the team totally confused as they try to figure out what all this stuff is even doing there. The blonde party leader just stares at the mess, asking what this is and what on earth could have happened to their house, as the rest of the group joins in and starts yelling in pure confusion. Looking closer at the pile, they see actual dragon skin just sitting there, along with a giant cyclops eye and a ton of other rare monster materials they recognize, making them realize the mountain of junk is actually valuable loot, like this massive griffin's claw. There's even a full set of camping gear buried in there, a bunch of other handy items and gear, which leads Hannah to ask if Gaze had really been hoarding all these materials this whole time. The knight sees the claw and starts getting nostalgic about their old life or death fight with the griffin, but the leader snaps, yelling at them and asking if this is really the time to be reminiscing, while the sheer shock of seeing all their stuff outside is enough to make the whole party sober up instantly. Even while they were busy cracking jokes, the members of the S-rank party, Crescent Claw, understood how bad the situation actually was. The blonde leader starts sweating, as Licia says she can definitely tell things are going south. But the story winds back just a little bit to show how all of this mess started, taking us to a few hours before the Crescent Claw members were thrown into a total panic. Right around the same time, those idiots were still busy celebrating their supposed new beginning. Gazes is at the stables, patting the dragon horses and telling them to take care of themselves since one of the animals makes a sad noise as if it knows he's leaving for good. So Gaze gives them one last look with a calm smile before walking away, stepping in front of that massive mountain of loot and materials. He looks at the pile and wonders if he's leaving a bit too much behind, but he figures it's better to just wait for the right time to use all these items he's gathered up. Gaze looks back at his tools, thinking about how his negotiation skills help them sell rare drops, but he quickly realizes he doesn't have time to handle that stuff for the party anymore, so he just smiles and tells himself they aren't rookies, so they'll probably be fine on their own. Getting materials and talking to merchants is just basic adventurer stuff. So Gaze feels like he's finally done everything he was supposed to do for them. He decides to just head out, do his usual rounds, and go see his regular clients one last time, walking away into the night while repeating that they aren't amateurs. The big question is whether Crescent Claw can actually handle the simple things Gaze expects of them. The whole group is slumped on the floor, looking totally wrecked and miserable. It turns out they couldn't even get into their mansion, so they're stuck staying at a cheap inn. The party is still stuck at the inn, and the leader wonders out loud what they're supposed to do with all the gear and items they're carrying. He points out that materials are supposed to be sold, while Licia reminds everyone they have a huge pile of rare drops too. Licia keeps going, saying it would be a massive waste if they just let all that valuable loot go to waste. So, the leader admits he has never actually sold materials himself and asks Goljan if he has a clue. But Hannah just mumbles that she doesn't remember how to do it either. They all sit there on the floor in a circle until a sudden idea finally hits them. The leader looks up, finally feeling like he's figured out a way to handle their problem. And, as they all crawl into bed, he tells the girls that everything is going to work out somehow. He decides that the very first thing they'll do tomorrow morning is call over a merchant to deal with the loot. Honestly, the four of them are so drained, they just don't want to think about their problems anymore, and pretty soon, it is up and it's officially morning for the group. The group heads over to a local shop called Kirov that claims to buy just about anything. They step inside the messy store and head straight for the counter to talk to the guy running the place. The leader flashes a big smile and asks the clerk if he can come pick up a bunch of materials they're trying to sell, but the guy just stares at them. The shopkeeper asks if they're the same group that kicked Gazes out, which completely catches the whole party off guard. The blonde leader is totally shocked that everyone already knows about their private party drama and Hannah and the knight get worked up because the clerk called guys, sir, while calling them just those guys. Leisha joins in on the complaining, saying she wants to be called miss instead of being disrespected like that. The shopkeeper eventually gives in, even though he reminds them they really should be bringing the gear to him. The leader quickly apologizes for being a hassle. While they get ready to move out, 4 of them pile into a cart with the merchant and head back to deal with all their leftover loot. The shopkeeper stands back and looks over the massive pile of loot the group dragged in. He just stares at the mountain of gear with a totally unimpressed look on his face. The party leader starts bragging, asking if the guy even sees stuff from dragons or griffins that often. The clerk just ignores the flex and asks how long they've even been adventuring or known gazes. The leader admits they started 3 years ago and spent about 2 of those years working with gaze Hannah, and the rest of the crew act all high and mighty about their history. The shopkeeper points out they've been with Gaius since they were basically brand new rookies. He sighs and says he honestly can't tell if they're the luckiest or unluckiest people alive. Leaving Hannah, Licia, Dick the knight, and the knight standing there with completely blank and confused expressions. The knight finally asks if they're being made fun of, and the girls realise they're being mocked. Licia finally realises they're being made fun of, while the clerk just looks at the group like they're idiots. He gestures to the massive pile of loot and asks if they're seriously trying to sell him a bunch of junk. The party leader stands there with a totally blank look on his face, completely failing to process the situation. The shopkeeper starts losing it, screaming at them for trying to dump all this garbage at his shop. It hits the leader hard. He stumbles back, asking if their materials are actually just low-grade trash. And the clerk points a finger, yelling that they're dead wrong if they think they can just sell any old thing they find. He tells them straight up that Gaze didn't just hoard stuff for no reason, making it clear that the castle only buys up large monster parts when there's an official notice, so most of this is useless. He explains that even for medium stuff, having more isn't better because the prep work is way too expensive, leaving the pile of parts as nothing but firewood if they aren't going to process it themselves. The clerk keeps going off on them, telling them to use their damn heads a little before calling him out for nothing. He yells that if they have no idea what to do with all that loot, they should just shove it in their item pouch and leave. The party leader just stands there with a totally blank look. He's never been talked to like this. Looking away, the clerk thinks to himself about how Gaze would never do something this stupid, making it clear the leader is way out of his depth. Though, he just blurted out that they'll buy a new item pouch anyway. He's honestly just confused by the whole situation since he's never actually been scolded before in his life. Hannah pipes up from the back, saying she's got the cash and wants him to make a bag with the biggest capacity possible. The shopkeeper sighs and warns the group that processing those materials is a full day of work. They better have the money, which makes the leader pretty nervous as he asks the guy exactly how much this is all going to cost. Clark rubs his chin and starts doing the math, telling them it'll be roughly. The clerk drops the price on them, 12 gold coins, and the party leader looks like his soul just left his body. Hannah can't even process the number, but the leader immediately loses his cool and yells that the price is a total rip-off. The clerk just stands there, eyes closed, taking in the disrespect with a scary amount of calm. Suddenly, he leans in with a terrifying look and asks them if they think doing business is some kind of joke, which sends the 2 of them into a panic, instantly bowing and apologizing for being so out of line. He keeps the pressure on, telling them the only reason they're even getting this price because he respects his price is because he respects Gaze's. The guy points out that they're lucky he's even talking to them, since the shop isn't even buying large beasts right now. He explains that processing all their junk is going to force him to close his doors to other customers. And if they still think he's cheating them, they can just take their materials home and let them rot in the dirt. The clerk demands the entire payment right now, leaving the whole party looking completely defeated and broke. The clerk stares them down and tells the group that if they want a job done, they have to pay the full price, leaving the entire party looking like they just lost their best friend. Totally drained and defeated. It turns out the shopkeeper wasn't actually trying to be a bully. He just got a bit heated because the party had the nerve to call him a scammer. The reality of their situation is clear. If Gaze was still with them, he would have done everything cheaper and with a way better attitude. But while the old party is struggling, Gaze is out in the middle of a forest, standing with some new people. A young guy with a sword thanks him for saving his life. The girl next to him is practically begging to give him some kind of reward for the help. Gaze just gives them a nice smile and tells them that no reward is necessary. He looks down at a dead goblin and says it's a total pain to run into monsters like that while just trying to pick herbs. The rookie girl tells Gaze she was totally out of mana and thought it was the end for her. Happy he stepped in and even managed to find the exact herbs she needed. Gaze just brushes it off, saying it was nothing and he just happened to know where the plants grew. And as the rookies wave goodbye, thinking that being a guide for new kids might be a pretty good life, he asks his Mount Sucre if he agrees and the Dranix just makes a little noise back, while Gaze admits to himself that he's actually starting to get a bit worried about things. Sitting by the campfire, he hopes his old party isn't out there causing trouble for other people, but he honestly has no clue what's really happening with his former teammates right now. Later on, the rookies head to the guild and report that a mysterious adventurer saved them, but the guild staff knows exactly who they're talking about. It's Gaze's, the guy who got kicked out of Crescent Claw. The word around town is that Gaze's reputation is just going up and up, even though he's not with his old crew anymore, while at the same time, everyone is starting to think Crescent Moon's Claw is actually a joke and their name is basically trashed. It makes you wonder if these guys are ever going to run into each other again down the line. Let's be real, they're definitely going to cross paths, sooner or later. It's pretty obvious. Most people reading this are probably thinking the same thing right now, as Gaze just keeps moving forward. You never really know how things will go, and there's no way the story can just end on a note like this. So begins the side story of the failing party, also known as the Crescent Moon's Claw Chronicles, showing the group struggling to keep things together as they head toward whatever mess is coming in the next chapter. Right now, the whole team is getting absolutely blasted by a general store owner who's screaming his head off at them, and honestly, these spoiled kids don't even have a second to feel sorry for themselves because they're too busy trying to survive the lecture. While everyone else is moving on, the old crew is stuck doing the grunt work, sorting through all the items Gaze left behind. Hannah looks totally out of it, blushing and saying she's just so busy, but she seems way more distracted than actually productive. She pulls something out of the pile and calls Goljan over to check it out, sounding way too excited for a pile of junk. Goljan turns around with a big smile and asks Hannah what she found. She holds up a horn, asking if it's from a red cyclops, which triggers this whole emotional trip back to the good old days. Hannah starts talking about how cool Goljan used to be back when they were starting out, specifically remembering when he'd desperately hold the line using that cover skill he just learned to keep them safe. Golan plays right into it, claiming it was his chivalry and his need to protect Hannah that gave him all that strength. But the reality is way different. Gaze was actually in the back, doing all the heavy lifting to keep them alive. They're just standing there flirting over a pile of trash while the shop owner watches them like they're crazy. The shop owner watches the crew and realizes he totally gets why Gaze decided to quit this party. He hears a weird noise from the back and turns around to see what's going on. The Draconix mounts are sitting in their stalls looking completely exhausted and hungry. They don't even make a sound, staring at him with these sad eyes while he stands there totally shocked. The blonde leader walks over and casually asks the owner if they're taking care of the mounts. Just stares. Hannah just stands there, looking awkward and silent, while the leader admits he hasn't checked on them today. The knight says he hasn't done it either, and Licia finally realizes Gaze's was the one doing everything all along. The shop owner stands there with this fake smile, trying his best not to completely lose it. He finally snaps and screams at them, calling them all huge idiots for being so useless. The whole party absolutely loses their minds as the owner's rage just washes over them. The shop owner looks at the party leader and asks if they seriously just dumped every single chore on Gaze's. He can't believe they didn't even offer to help, thinking to himself that these kids are actually useless. The owner tells them this is a huge problem, but the leader just makes excuses, saying Gaze always insisted on doing it himself. The owner gets scary and asks why he wouldn't just offer to do the work together since it's his own beast. The leader starts sweating and stutters that nobody ever told him he had to do it. The owner stares him down, asking how he can be so casual and act like it's no big deal when the stable trough is sitting there filled with old dry straw that hasn't been touched in forever. He orders them to get to work changing the straw and getting the animals food and water right now. They struggle with the chores. The owner explains that draconics go wild if they aren't cared for and points out that these creatures will never follow orders from someone who doesn't look after them. The shop owner keeps lecturing them, up a warning that these mounts will go totally wild in no time if they aren't treated right, since taking care of your ride is the absolute most important rule for any adventurer to follow. Turns out these guys were so busy with fighting and dating that they completely forgot the basics. And now the Draconics mounts are just standing there, looking totally fed up with the whole situation. They're basically thinking about what a huge pain this is as the party leader struggles through the chores. The owner tells him to get it done twice a day and finish before sunset. Meanwhile, Hannah realizes all their rare gear is breaking and needs to be fixed with better materials. The knight gets chewed out for not even knowing his potions, which is something he should have learned ages ago. The owner can't believe how clueless this whole group is. But the sun finally comes up on a brand new day. The whole group is completely wiped out inside their place. The party leader and the others are slumped at the table while Licia stays tucked under the covers, asking everyone who's actually going to handle making breakfast, since no one is moving. Goljan looks up and tells Licia she should just do it because it feels right. But she loses it immediately, telling him to stop making things up based on his own imagination. Then, Hannah pipes up from the table, sounding totally annoyed as she tells Licia not to yell first thing in the morning. Goljan tries to shift the work to Hannah instead, reminding her she complained about Gaze's cooking and must know how to make something. Hannah doesn't want to hear it, telling him to stop digging up every little detail before pointing the finger right back at him. She yells that since Goljan is the one who fired Gaze, he's the one who has to cook. Licia just watches from the bed, pointing out that Hannah is now the one yelling right after she told everyone else to be quiet. In the end, Goljan gets stuck in the kitchen, standing over the stove, trying to fry up a meal for the rest of them. Gaze is stuck in the kitchen making food, but as he works, he can't help but wonder if he made a huge mistake, thinking back to when Goljan first asked him why he wouldn't just give up on being an item master and switch jobs. The two of them were sitting by a campfire in the woods back then, having a serious talk about his career, when Gaze just smiled and told him that being an item master is the only thing that really feels right for him. Has started listing off all his specialized abilities like his inventory, his crazy throwing range, and his appraisal skills, pointing out that the item master is the only class that can actually pull all of those things together. Gaze really believed that if someone could actually master every single one of those skills, they'd be unbeatable. That, even when compared to all the fancy high-tier classes that most adventurers look up to, he promised to work his head off to prove he was worth keeping around, asking the group to just let him handle all the support. But back in the present, absence, he just stands there, holding a plate of food, wondering where it all went wrong. The table is finally set with a big spread of rice and fresh bread. But even with everyone sitting down for a nice meal in the kitchen, Gaze is totally stuck in his own head, thinking about how he spent all that time taking care of the Draconics mounts. He remembers being out in the stables alone and how he never once asked the rest of the party for any help. Carbon notices. Mostly because he figured taking care of your own mount was just something you were supposed to do. It wasn't just the animals either. The whole group basically lived off his negotiation skills every time they went shopping, asking himself what the others were even doing while he was busy holding the whole party together. And the answer hits him pretty hard. They were just hanging out and flirting while he did all the work. Gaze tries to keep it together. He can't stop a tear from falling as he realizes how much he was taken for granted, sitting there alone crying into his food. Goljan just sits there with his back to everyone, his shoulders shaking. The rest of the group can only stare, not knowing what to do. Big Hannah realizes she's actually suing, and Licia starts to freak out, repeating that their leader is really crying right in front of them. The kitchen goes completely quiet while the four of them sit around the table. It's just awkward silence and the sound of Golgan breaking down, "Hey son." The group finally accepts the situation. They realize there's nothing they can do but just sit there and let him cry it out. Turns out the members of Crescent Claw were never ready to see their big shot leader lose it like this. And later on, the whole party walks through the center of town looking totally miserable while everyone on the street watches them pass. Locals start whispering as they go by, pointing out that they're the infamous group that kicked Gazes out of the party. The rumors are spreading fast. People are talking about how they tried to frame the local shop for price gouging and they can't believe it. Everyone is saying they don't have the right mindset for an S-rank party. They think all that high-level gear is just being wasted on them. The crowd keeps talking trash, saying how annoying it is when adventurers act like they own the place. All party just has to stand there and take it. The town is buzzing with people looking around and acting all confused because of some loud commotion. Hannah just stares while Golgan looks over his shoulder, asking what all the racket is. And noise start filling the air above the city streets, and some guy comes running out with his hands up, yelling for anyone to help him. Golgan and the girls stop in their tracks as someone from the crowd begs for somebody to stop them. It turns out the Draconic's mounts have completely snapped and are going wild in the middle of town. The beasts are charging through the streets, making all the locals run for their lives. The guy says the wholesaler bought way too many of them and just couldn't keep them under control, adding that this is exactly what happens when people try to handle more than they're ready for. A woman holding a kid yells to call the guild guard right now before anyone ends up getting hurt. Gar stands there in the middle of all the smoke and dust. He's just watching it happen and stays quiet for a second before saying that they should probably get involved too. Gar starts sweating a bit, realizing that his old group might have been making a scene just like this. While the Draconic's mounts keep going absolutely nuts and tearing up the place, the shop clerk from Kirov is losing it, actually yelling out in a panic because one of the wild beasts has actually smashed its way inside his shop. The armoured knight from the Crescent Claw party steps up. He's ready to use a special skill. He plants his feet and starts glowing with power, acting like a human wall for the town. The beasts all stop what they're doing and lock eyes with him at the same time, charging right at the knight while he stands his ground against all three of them. The three Draconics slam into the knight's shield all at once. The impact is huge, but he holds his ground while Hannah looks on from above, waiting for the perfect moment to act. She focuses her power. It's time for the Dark Mage to use a special skill. Hannah calls out to the freezing air, getting it to take form and forge a path as she unleashes her icicle road, sending massive frozen spikes shooting out of the ground. The beasts are stuck in the ice, and just then, the High Cleric, Licia, steps in to finish the job. She jumps high and spins her staff, releasing a wave of calming magic that hits the beasts and knocks them out cold. They're totally asleep in the middle of the ice. The people watching can't believe it. They're yelling about how fast the party won. Good. Hannah looks back and asks if they finally finished off all the beasts, but just then, Licia spots something that makes her freeze up as a stray Draenix comes charging out of the smoke right toward a little kid who has no idea what's coming. Everyone starts yelling that the beast is going straight for the child, while the woman nearby just loses it and screams. Before the beast can reach him, Golgan jumps in and uses his rank 1 skill to land a massive hit, and the Draenix gets knocked back and hits the ground hard, completely out of the fight. The little kid just stands there, looking up with wide eyes. He's totally blown away by what he just saw. Golgan leans over and asks the kid if he's doing okay after that close call. The people watching are confused and start asking what kind of move that was, realizing he used the flat of his blade. So, it's explained that by using the back of the sword instead of the edge, you can deliver enough of a shock to knock someone out without actually cutting them. Golan stands there with his weapon. It's explained that he's using an advanced paladin skill called Holdback, which is all about showing mercy. Each group is known as Crescent Moon's Claw, and, being an S-rank party, they definitely look the part, especially with Golgan leading the way. Even with all the drama, it's clear their actual fighting skills are the real deal, and the rest of the party stands ready behind their leader. While everyone is watching, a small hand reaches out and tugs on Golgan's cloak. It's the little kid from before, and he's looking right at Golan to thank him for saving his life, which catches the party leader totally off guard. The kid's eyes are literally sparkling as he tells Golgan how strong and cool he is. He's basically found a new hero. The town's people standing nearby start whispering among themselves, feeling the mood shift as they watch the scene go down. A guy in the crowd gets a worried look on his face. Everyone is starting to think they might have misjudged the situation, and they realize Crescent Moon's Claw actually saved the whole town, thinking the party was just being humble about their power. But looking at Golan, someone wonders if this kid's praise is just going to make him get a massive ego all over again. Golgan starts talking to himself, agreeing that he really is as cool as the kid says. He's fully buying into his own hype, and the crowd keeps the energy going, cheering and screaming for their new heroes as they celebrate the rescue. Getting totally carried away, Golan laughs and tells the kid he's exactly right about how awesome he is. Hannah chimes in with a smug look, reminding the townspeople that they are an official S-rank party, and Licia adds that their whole mission is just to complete quests for the people, acting like true noble adventurers. Goljan strikes a pose and shouts that people needing help are waiting for them, so he tells the group it's time to head to the guild. Inside the guild, things are actually pretty quiet, with the clerk just helping out a regular customer at the front desk until the front doors get slammed open with a massive crash that catches the guild clerk completely off his guard. The whole party stands there in the doorway, with light shining behind them like they're in some kind of play, and Golgan yells out a loud greeting to everyone inside, looking ready to take on whatever job they have. Goljan leads the group to the counter and yells that they're the Crescent Moon Claws. He demands an S-rank quest right away, but the clerk just looks at them calmly and asks if they really are the 4 members of that party. She tells them she has a special message for the whole group, and, with a big smile, she lets them know they won't be taking any quests. Instead, they're all going back to training. The entire party just freezes up. Their faces go totally blank, like they can't even process what she just said. They stand there at the counter for a long time without moving, making the other adventurers in line wait behind them. Hannah finally finds her voice and stammers about the training, while the heavy shielder loses his cool and asks what the hell is going on. Licia starts panicking too, crying out about why she has to do training now of all times when they're supposed to be pros. The clerk doesn't budge and explains that they've been reported for being jerks to shopkeepers and acting like total amateurs. She tells them they have to redo the beginner courses and pass a dungeon test with a guild helper, or they'll lose their licenses for good. Shastam. Hearing that their entire careers are on the line, the group looks completely defeated, like their souls just left their bodies. While they stand there in shock, the other people in the guild start whispering and pointing at them. Shesh, realizing these heroes are actually in huge trouble. People nearby start whispering about how the party has been messing up a lot lately, which makes the gossip even worse, as others guess they caused that scene in town earlier. Hannah gets worked up about all the rumours spreading around, while the knight realises how bad this looks. The group worries Goljan is going to get depressed from the hate. But then he just stands there with a creepy little smirk on his face, chuckling to himself, acting like a total egomaniac, saying, the stuff people say is just noise like birds chirping, and claims that being gifted means you just have to deal with people being jealous of you. He actually thinks everything is going to work out fine, even though it's pretty obvious to everyone else that things are definitely not fine at all. The clerk isn't fazed by his act and just asks them straight up if they're going to start the training. Golan keeps acting like a hero, saying all this trouble is just a trial meant for an S-class guy like him. He's actually getting fired up by the pressure and yells for them to bring on the beginner's training course. He starts shouting about how he's going to pass the whole thing with flying colours, claiming the party is definitely going to walk away with a perfect score. He tries to hype up the rest of the group to get moving, so Hannah admits she usually hates dealing with annoying stuff like this, but she's not the type to just sit back and take a loss. The knight gets pumped too, saying that if they're doing this, they might as well go all out. And Licia joins in, telling everyone to aim for that perfect score. Starting with the very first greeting, Licia hypes the group up, telling everyone to get ready to go. The whole party yells at the top of their lungs that they're ready for the training and in the guild's hands. It's honestly hard to tell if the Crescent Moonclaws learned a lesson, or if they're just getting swept up in the moment, since they have no idea how brutal this training session is going to be. Everything is about to get way worse when a demon instructor shows up for this hellish beginner's course. The beginner's training finally starts up, and this is basically a technical session the guild runs for anyone who wants to become a member. By finishing the course, the guild officially certifies their skills and gives them a real rank. The room is packed with all kinds of people trying to rise up in the world. Some are just looking for a life of thrills, while others might be there for something else entirely. The guild is being strict, targeting anyone about to lose their license because of their crappy behaviour, which explains why such a weird mix of people is crammed into the room, including the Crescent Moon Claws, who are definitely feeling the pressure as someone in the crowd yells about the huge crisis they're all facing. Hannah sits there trying to stay cool, thinking about how she only ended up here because she got swept up in Golan's drama. The way everyone else in the room is staring at them is really starting to get under her skin. She tries to remind herself that she's a top-tier S-rank black mage and shouldn't have to deal with being stuck in a boring lecture with a bunch of total rookies. The situation is just a massive embarrassment for her, but then she looks over and sees something that makes her completely lose it. She snaps at her teammates, yelling at them because the Knight Licia and Goljan are all actually focused, and she wants to know why they're studying ahead like a bunch of goody two-shoes. Golan is taking this way too seriously, yelling at Hannah that as Shrankers, they're basically required to get a perfect score, mostly because he wants them to act like proper role models for all the rookies sitting around them. Licia jumps in too, sounding all happy as she suggests to Hannah that they should start going over old exam questions, one asking if it's okay to leave a dead monster in the forest without cleaning it up just because you're tired. Hannah stares at the page, overthinking the answer while looking stressed. She finally loses it and yells that it's a garbage question, since it feels like any answer she gives would be wrong anyway. Suddenly, a deep laugh from the front of the room cuts her off, making her stop and look up, where a smiling old man tells the group he's actually impressed they showed up early to get some studying in. He introduces himself as Varian, the instructor for this beginner's course, and says it's nice to meet all of them. While the old man keeps chuckling, Hannah just sits there with her arms crossed, thinking he's a total loser. Varian points to the book on the desk, bringing up that shitty question Hannah was just complaining about, and Hannah just leans on her hand, looking bored as she says the answer is obviously false. Varian starts explaining the consequences of leaving a monster corpse behind in the woods, saying how the smell of death and rot causes a lot of problems because it spreads disease and brings even scarier monsters into the area. Varian adds that this doesn't just apply to cleaning up after a hunt. He tells them it's completely wrong to skip out on harvesting materials from a big monster, and it's even worse to yell at a merchant who's actually willing to take the corpse off their hands. Varian laughs a bit, telling the group that just fighting however they want makes them no different from a common thug. With the lecture officially moving forward, he says they're going to start with the real basics of being an adventurer. Gaze looks up at the night sky from his campsite, wondering if his old party members are doing all right, but he just sits there in silence by the fire while Sukra rests nearby. Suddenly, he catches himself and asks what he's even doing worrying about those people, since he remembers they were the ones who kicked him out in the first place. Just thinking about the old days starts to piss him off, especially when he sees memories of how they'd start flirting with each other every chance they got. It was always the paladin and the black mage pairing up together. And the heavy shielder and the high priest were a perfect match, too, which was just way too cliché. Gaze complains to himself, asking if backline support item masters are just not popular with anyone, and he finally just yells out that he wants girls to like him too. The bushes nearby start rustling loudly, and Gaze immediately snaps his head toward the noise. He narrows his eyes, focusing hard to see what's in the dark. As someone approaches, he realizes the footsteps sound like a person instead of a monster. There isn't any hostility coming from them either. A girl steps out and says she finally found him, calling out his name like she knows him well. Gaze looks back at her, feeling like her face is familiar, but he can't quite place it. She introduces herself as Mia and asks him if he still remembers her from before. It clicks for him. He remembers meeting her during a dungeon raid back when he saved her after she got separated from her old party. The campfire crackles between them as the night grows quiet. Two of them sit down by the flames to catch up on everything since they last saw each other. Miria tells him that while she was just a mage when they first met, she's actually trained to become a magic swordsman now. Miria looks at him and says she barely recognized him. He's clearly got a lot stronger since they last met, and Gaze starts wondering what actually brought her all the way out here. He mentions that an advanced class shouldn't have any reason to be in a beginner's forest. She insists that she definitely has a reason. He just stands there, looking completely stunned as he waits for her to explain herself. Miria starts getting really flustered and fidgets with her hands while trying to talk. She looks him right in the eyes, pushing hard as she asks if he'd be willing to do something with her, and finally gets the words out. She asks him if he would want to form a party together. Sucre the Mount just lays there on the grass, looking totally confused by the whole vibe. Meanwhile, Gaze is just staring at her with his mouth open, and he eventually loses it and shouts out, asking her why on earth she'd want to team up with him. It is incredibly obvious to everyone that Meria is totally into guys based on how she's acting. Gaze just stands there looking completely clueless. He hasn't noticed a single thing. Even though Gaze always says he wants to be a popular guy, He is actually just hopelessly dense when it comes to girls. And later on, Dr. Vian finishes up at the blackboard and tells the class that the indoor lecture is over. He explains that they'll be moving to the training grounds this afternoon for some actual combat practice. Varian tells everyone to get some rest and make sure they show up on time. Then the students head to lunch. Over at the cafeteria, Goljan complains that the morning lectures were so boring, his head almost exploded. He gets fired up and shouts that he's definitely going to ace the combat portion later today. Hannah just gives him a tired look, telling him she already knows what he's going to say before he even says it. Hannah sits at the lunch table looking completely annoyed. Addressed her, she says that every single person in the room is looking down on them. Outside the building, Golgan's voice carries through the air as he tells his team to just wait and watch, because he's going to make everyone realize what the true power of an S-rank looks like during the combat training. Later that afternoon, a large white tarp covers a massive cage sitting out on the grassy training grounds. Instructor Varian stands before the class and explains that for this exercise, they're going to release some captured magical beasts. Tells the students that they shouldn't have any trouble handling them, but they still need to stay totally focused and make sure they don't let their guard down even for a second. Goljan and the rest of the Crescent Claw party draw their weapons and strike a pose. They're more than ready to show off. Varian puts his hand on the tarp and says, "Now then," as he prepares to reveal the enemies, and he yells for them to begin right away. A pack of massive wolves charges out of the cage toward the students. A pack of forest wolves charges forward, but they're just fodder for what's coming. Hannah stares them down with a serious look, thinking the others are really underestimating what she can do. She looks at the sink beasts and starts readying her staff, figuring this is going to be easy, and plans to let Ben the heavy shielder draw them all in with a taunt first, so she can just blast the whole group and burn them to a crisp with her magic all at once. She triggers her black mage skill and fires off a massive fire arrow. It into the pack, but Goljan suddenly jumps right into the line of fire, yelling that he's going to take them out one by one. He keeps charging in with his sword raised, completely ignoring the massive spell she just launched. Hannah's face goes totally pale as she tries to yell for him to wait, but it's way too late. She screams that he's an idiot and tells him to dodge as the fire blast slams right into his position. Golan finally notices the massive blast of fire coming his way, but he's already stuck right in the middle of the explosion, which completely swallows him up as the magic hits the ground with a huge bang. Emerging from the smoke, looking like a total mess, Goljan shouts out in shock because he didn't expect to get roasted. And now he's jumping around yelling about how much it burns while the monsters just watch. Ben watches the chaos from the side, realizing Goljan and Hannah are both trying to hit the same target, making the whole team look like a joke since they're completely out of sync and don't know how to work together at all. And to make it worse, he wonders why Licia isn't even healing anyone yet. Hannah gets fed up with the lack of progress and decides that if everyone is going to be this slow, she might as well just finish the job herself. So, she starts prepping a massive area magic spell to end the entire fight in one go, sitting there as her staff starts glowing with all this crazy power. Hannah spots her opening and tells everyone the target is that group right before she unleashes a flame scatter shot. But Ben jumps in at the same time to use his heavy shielder special skill, hitting a massive shield bash that kicks up a ton of dirt and debris, leaving Hannah standing there looking pretty proud of herself until the smoke clears and shows two wolves charging straight through the mess of the failed attack. Hannah sees the pack just scattered everywhere and starts complaining to Ben about why he had to blow them away. But her complaining stops quick when she realizes she's standing all alone with wolves growling behind her. She starts shaking, Farkley realizing she's somehow managed to draw a really awkward amount of aggro from the monsters, and before she can even move, the wolves lunge straight at her with their teeth out. She just freezes up as they close in, thinking to herself that this is getting really bad. Suddenly, a bright light flashes in her face while Vian just watches from the back like it's nothing. The wolves get blasted back by a sudden flash of force, stopping the attack. Hannah just stands there, staring up in total shock. She can't believe she's still in one piece, while Vian holds his staff with a big smile on his face, looking completely relaxed. The instructor yells out that the session is officially over. The group stands there over the down beasts as Vian chuckles and tells them they did some good work out there. He seems pretty happy, but he mentions that this level of strength is exactly what he'd expect from an S-rank party. He goes on to say their magic and the way they use their skills is honestly amazing. But then he stops and says that, even though their power is great, their actual teamwork is just terrible. The whole party looks pretty embarrassed while he continues his lecture, explaining that it was a smart move to draw all those magical beasts in with a taunt. But the problem started when the group didn't bother to talk or decide who was going to take down which target first. Varian continues his lecture, pointing out the vanguard never told the rear guard what the plan was, so the backup never had a chance to sync up. He explains that because Leisha was so focused on prepping support magic for Ben, she couldn't react when things went sideways. Looking over the battlefield, he notes that rushing a big attack just to show off actually wrecked their teamwork, and in a real fight, that would have been it. It's clear they aren't paying any attention to what their teammates are actually trying to do. Varian smiles as he gets to the real point, telling them the actual reason their coordination is so bad is because Gaze has been spoiling them the entire time. The whole party stands there in total shock as the words sink, and Hannah looks completely stressed out, realizing just how much they depended on the guy they kicked out. Varian doesn't give them time to mope though, yelling at them to stop standing around gawking and start moving. He tells them not to leave the monster carcasses just lying there on the ground. The instructor finishes by shouting at them to clean up the mess, reminding them he already taught them how to do this in class. The crowd watching the training exercise starts whispering and laughing at the mess. At Costas, they just saw one guy in the crowd says Crescent Moon's claws was a total train wreck, and he mentions he was actually hoping to learn something from them today. But now he jokes that the whole display was just a great example of what not to do. The person adds that they bet that story about the party stopping a monster rampage in town was a total lie, too, making someone else point out how pathetic it is that they kicked out their support just to end up looking like this. Hannah hears the insults and says she definitely doesn't want to end up as a laughing stock. The party members hang their heads and walk away while everyone around them keeps talking trash. And once they get back, Golgan is still in shock, questioning if they're even really Shranks. He asks if they seriously can't do anything without a novice class guy like Gaze around. Back in a room filled with books and scrolls, Mia leans over her desk. While back at the training grounds, Diane looks at Hannah and tells her what a waste it is. He points out that she's using Heil fire arrows without incantations and area of effect spells, and Vayan explains that even in the royal capital, you wouldn't find a black mage who's mastered that at her age. He tells her she must have focused so much on those spells that she ignored the basics of adventuring, stating that her lack of balance isn't really something to be praised for. Hannah looks pretty upset, as he adds that talent is useless if you can't actually use it in a real fight. So, she just mutters under her breath about how much she hates old men who talk too much. Vayan just laughs and says he's sorry for going on like that. Over in her messy room, Miria grips her desk, thinking about how something is unforgivable. Hannah's eyes narrow as she repeats Varian's words, asking if they were really spoiled by Gaze, questioning if the old instructor actually thinks they can't do anything on their own. Later that evening at their lodgings, Licia asks if Hannah is going to be all right, while Ben mentions she's been locked in her room since they got back, making Licia even more worried. Golgan just shrugs it off, saying she's not the type to just break down over something like this, taking a sip of his drink while thinking about how well Varian knew how to handle her. Down the hall, footsteps heavy on the floorboard, Hannah mutters about what an obnoxious old geyser Varian is, before she suddenly slams the door open and shouts that everyone seems to be there. She looks completely fired up, announcing that it's officially time to review today's teamwork, leaving Licia and the guys looking at her, surprised by her sudden burst of energy. A deep laugh echoes through the room, cutting through the tense atmosphere as Vian stands in the doorway, asking if they're reviewing their lessons and calling it admirable. The whole group just stands there in dead silence, staring back at the old man. Suddenly, the shock hits everyone at once, and they all scream out the professor's name. Varian just smiles and tells them he simply couldn't leave them all alone, explaining that coming to check on them was a choice he made on his own. He sits down with some tea and says he'll be watching their every move to judge their skills, adding that he's actually going to be staying there with them for a while to bond. It turns out the party's performance in the training was a total disaster, and now Hannah and the others are freaking out because their daily life with the demon instructor has officially begun. Gaze has no idea what's going down back at his old place. So, hanging with Maria in the woods, and Sucre is just standing there, looking completely fed up with how cheesy and innocent their conversation is. As night falls, the question remains if the paths of these former friends will ever cross again. And the next big thing to look for is the reveal of who that demon instructor really is. The scene shifts to a fancy room where Golgan wakes up and tells himself good morning, reminding himself that his name is Golgan and he's the guy in charge. He's the leader of the S-rank party called Crescent Moon's Claw, and he sits up to stretch, thinking that a top-rank adventurer has to stay top-rank even in the morning. He thinks being an early riser is exactly what makes him better than everyone else. And then it's time for him to move on to the next part of his morning routine. Golgan decides to just head back to sleep, diving face first into the pillow for what he calls an S-rank snooze. He thinks to himself that having a slow morning is a luxury only meant for an S-rank guy like him, and he's not going to let anyone mess with his daily routine. But just then, the door flies open and Varian yells out a big good morning to everyone, shouting at them to wake up and calling them all brats to get them moving. Golgan and Hannah both sit up in bed, looking totally exhausted, completely shocked out of their sleep. Varian just keeps smiling and tells them that the early bird gets 3 gold, getting them to snap out of it and wash their faces because they've got a job to do before breakfast. Hannah lets out a huge yawn and wonders what kind of job they could possibly be doing as they look over at a pile of empty wooden crates and tied-up bundles waiting for them. Varian just stands there with a big grin on his face, telling everyone it's officially time to clean up. The whole group looks completely drained, and Licia asks if they really have to start cleaning the second they wake up. Hannah isn't having it at all. She looks super annoyed and asks why they even have to do stuff like this, pointing a finger at Vian and telling him he can't just barge in and start bossing them around like that. She goes on a bit of a rant, explaining that her morning is supposed to start with a nice hot cup of tea, and that chores like cleaning should really just be handled by whoever actually feels like doing them. Varian just chuckles at her attitude, sarcastically commenting on how elegant her lifestyle sounds while she walks away. But then a massive crashing sound comes from the other room. Everything starts clattering around and catching Gaze and Varian off guard. Hannah is standing right in the doorway, looking completely frozen and terrified, staring into space with a look of pure dread while she weakly whispers something about her black tea. The room is a total disaster zone filled with junk and trash, while someone off-screen admits they can't find anything. Varian starts shouting that good work only comes from a good lifestyle, which doesn't help Golgan and the others who look completely miserable, as they're told that adventurers who live in a mess won't ever succeed at anything. Varian holds up a rag and keeps lecturing the group, telling them that the very first step is just staying organised, because if they don't even know where their own gear is, they're basically just wasting valuable treasure. Apart, Golgan is sweating buckets while he tries to sort through a crate of heavy swords, looking like he's about to hit his limit. While Ben stares at a random crown skull and Licia tries to make sense of a mountain of potions, Hannah finally snaps and starts yelling, throwing her hands up in the air as junk flies everywhere around her. Ben looks totally defeated and says there's just no end in sight, while the rest of the party lies, passed out right on the floor. Licia is in shock, asking Gaze if he really used to handle all of this equipment by himself. Varian keeps the lecture going, telling the group that cleaning and keeping things organised is a daily job, but he's not a total monster. He tells them they don't have to get it all done at once. He decides they've done enough for now and suggests they finally sit down to eat some breakfast. While they eat, the reality of the situation hits Golgan. He asks the girls if he really just left every single thing for Gaze to handle, but someone else at the table scoffs, saying Gaze was just doing all that stuff on his own. They keep going, saying that there's no reason for any of them to feel grateful for what he did. Golgan just looks down at his plate, quiet for a second, while he thinks about his old teammate. He stares off, wondering what kind of life Gaze is even living right now. Meanwhile, Gaze is actually just walking through a busy town square when he hears someone call his name. It's Miria, and she's all hyped up to finally see some of those legendary item master shopping techniques. Miria is all fired up, telling Gars she's going to be watching his every move. All he can do is give a nervous little laugh as they head out. It turns out Miria has a specific dungeon she wants to beat, and that's the real reason she wanted Gaze in her party. Gaze realises he must have made a huge impression on her back when his old team, Crescent Moon's Claw, saved them both. But Mia gets serious, telling him that even back then she had a bad feeling about how his old party was treating him. Gaze is caught off guard by that, which makes Mia second guesses herself and ask if she's being weird, but she keeps going, pointing out that setting up a camp is usually a job for the whole group, not just one guy. She lists off everything he was doing: tents, the fire, cooking, and even the mounts, and how he was handling it all solo. Gaze thinks about it for a second and admits that, yeah, now that she mentions it, he really did end up doing everything alone. He rubs the back of his head. Since he didn't have much power in a fight, he figured he should at least do the chores, but Miria isn't having it, shouting that doing damage isn't the only part of being in a fight. Miria starts listing off everything he did in the fight, the item support, breaking enemy spells, and calling out all the combos, and she tells him straight up that his support was actually perfect. Gaze just stands there taking it in while Mia looks down, being pretty sad as she admits she honestly can't understand why a guy like him got fired. There's a long silence between them as they walk along the stone path. Finally, Gaze just shrugs it off. Santa laugh, and he gives a little laugh and jokes that maybe he was just in the way because the other party members were all hooking up. But Mia just stares at him, looking completely shocked that he can be so casual about it. She asks if he's even being serious right now, which makes Gaze wonder if his perspective is really that weird. Mia doesn't say anything else. She just looks at him with this worried expression like she's seeing something new, thinking to herself that Gaze is definitely a bit off in his own way. Almost like, as she watches him walk down the street, she realizes he acts like someone who gave up on trusting people a long time ago. The two of them head over to a local buyback shop called Kiruaf. The clerk is busy working behind the counter until he notices someone walk in and gives a casual welcome. He looks up and gets hyped when he sees who it is, saying it's been a while since he saw Mia, and then asks if she finally found a new teammate. Maria gives him a big smile and says, "That's right." She introduces the guy in the hood as her senior who's going to help her clear the dungeon. Gaia stays quiet in his disguise, just checking out some of the potion jars on the shelves. The shop owner stops what he's doing and just stares at the hooded guy for a long second. The old guy finally speaks up to get his attention. Gaze looks like he's about to jump out of his skin. The clerk looks him right in the eye and asks if he's actually Gaze under that hood. The whole room goes dead silent for a moment as they just stare at each other. Gaze finally gives up and pulls off his invisible mask, asking the guy how he even figured it out. The secret is out. Gaze was wearing a distortion hood that messes with how people see him, but the shopkeeper wasn't fooled at all. Albeit Gaze just messes with his collar and admits the old man is still sharp. The clerk points him out, saying the only reason he knew was because Gaze is way too good at picking items. He tells the guy to hold his head high, since he definitely didn't leave old party because of a mistake. Then, the old guy teases him for leaving Miria behind while he's looking at gear, making her turn bright red. He tells them they need to actually talk and shop as a team, which catches Gaze a bit off guard. So Gaze stops what he's doing to apologize to Mia while the clerk just watches them with a smile. Gaz starts including her, asking if this specific ether is the right choice for a magic swordsman's mana recovery. Maria looks genuinely happy that he asked, giving him a big smile and saying, "It's perfect." By the time they're done, they've piled up a massive stack of supplies on the shop counter. Gaze looks over the counter and asks the shopkeeper what the total is for the whole pile of gear. The clerk starts sorting through the bottles, mentioning that Gaze definitely has an eye for the high-end stuff veterans like. He starts counting everything up, going through the high potions, ethers, antidotes, and scrolls. While Gaze waits for the damage, the old man tells him the whole lot is going to cost him 6 gold coins. Gaze looks at the items and admits that price is a bit much for him to handle, but then he gets a clever look on his face, clearly planning to haggle his way into a better deal. He mentions how the town has been flooded with a ton of rookie adventurers lately. And then he calls the clerk out on his business troubles. The guy is probably struggling to move his veteran gear while trying to pivot to the newbies. Gaze tells the old man to have a heart and give him a break on the price, pointing out that since he's taking all this dead stock off his hands at once, he should get a discount. Gaze puts his hands together and puts on his best pleading face, asking the shopkeeper if he can score a little discount, but it's not just a regular ask. He activates his special item master skill, called negotiation, to seal the deal. The pressure hits the shopkeeper hard, leaving him sweating and looking like he's caught in some kind of mental trap. The guy finally loses it, holding his head and shouting for Gaze to stop using that crazy skill on him. He gives up and says he'll do the discount if Gaze just stops while Mia watches the whole thing go down. With the deal finally done, the gold coins are laid out on the counter next to the crate of supplies. But as they pack up, Clark mentions that the crescent moon claws haven't been doing so hot ever since Gaze left. That gets Gaze's attention immediately, so he turns back and asks if something actually happened to his old party. Keeper looks at him like he's crazy and asks how he hasn't heard the news yet, leaving Gaze standing there completely lost, having no idea what kind of mess his old team has gotten into. Shopkeeper leans in and asks Gaze if he really left behind every single item he was managing for the group. Gaze looks at the barrels of gear and says it's no big deal since all that stuff belonged to the party anyway. He mentions there were some basic camping supplies and a few rare drops that are tricky to use, but since they aren't amateurs, he figures they can handle the inventory on their own, leaving the shopkeeper staring at him while Mia looks on, getting pretty stressed about how naive he's being. The shopkeeper starts laughing while Mia tries to explain the situation, and then the guy finally decides to tell him everything. Gaze is about to hear the actual truth about his old squad. It turns out the Crescent Moon's claw has fallen into a pathetic state ever since they kicked him out of the party. And now their reputation in town is completely trashed. After that disastrous training session for the beginners, Gaze just stands there with his eyes wide, utterly shocked by how fast things went downhill without him. Mia just stands there listening to the news, and she honestly can't believe how dumb this whole thing is. Gar starts to panic. He's thinking there's no way an S-rank party could be this messy, especially since they acted like everything would be fine during the handover. But now he's realizing they might have just kicked him out without a single plan. The shopkeeper tells him he doesn't need to sweat his reputation because everyone in town knows the truth. In fact, his old squad is busy getting torn a new one right now. The guy explains that Master Varian actually went down to the guild to personally instruct the party, and Gaze looks like he's seen a ghost. He knows exactly how brutal Varian's training sessions can get. He lets out a massive yell that can be heard from outside the shop, totally losing his mind over the news. Meanwhile, Varian is just hanging out and laughing to himself, looking like he's having a great time while the boxes of gear and potions finally get organized. It took all day, but everything's starting to look right. Varian tells the group that combat training starts tomorrow, so they need to get some rest. But first, he wants them to get up and restore their energy. Whilst he's humming, he suggests throwing a drinking party to double as his welcome bash, even though the table is just covered in random bottles and some plain bread. Licia and Ben come back from their supply run, all excited. Hannah just stares at a bottle and complains that it's nothing but cheap booze. She says now that they're an S-rank party, she shouldn't be drinking this stuff anymore. Licia reminds her that they're broke from buying that item pouch and paying for scrap collection. Plus, they can't even take on S-rank quests yet to make it back. Golan just hangs his head and says they'll be living on a tight budget for a while. Hannah takes a long look at her drink and sighs, wondering if this cheap stuff that C-rankers chug just to get wasted is even going to suit her taste at all. She starts listing off all the stress, exhaustion, and total humiliation of being stuck in a beginner's course with an old guy, then just decides to chug the whole thing to deal with all that anxiety. She stops for a second to process the taste, and someone yells out a toast to another day of making it through. The whole group clinks their mugs together, cheering for all the hard work they put in. Goljan looks pretty impressed and tells Professor Vian that the old man can really hold his liquor, making Vian laugh and say he isn't ready to let a bunch of youngsters outdrink him just yet. Vian takes another big drink, enjoying how much better the alcohol tastes after a long day of cleaning work, thinking to himself that once the kids get a little buzzed, he can start being nice to them to win them over. He plays the part of the nice old man, telling the group that even if Gaze messed up, he's still just a young guy with plenty of time to grow. And the party members all start laughing, joking around about how Gaze being a bit of a mess actually made him kind of cute. Varian's eyes sharpen for a split second and he decides it's time to get the real story out of them before the booze wears off. He drops the casual talk for a second to ask the group what actually happened, specifically why they really decided to kick Gazes out, causing a mug to slam down on the table. As the whole vibe of the conversation starts to change, Golgan just grins with a drunk, smug look on his face and says the guy was honestly just getting in their way. Varian sits there with his usual smile, just listening to them talk while Hannah pipes up to agree, saying that since Gaze is just a novice item master, they are really on their level to begin with. He was never really on level to begin with. Goljan is already feeling the alcohol, leaning back with Hannah and complaining about how there was a single guy living with two couples, which Hannah follows up by throwing her hands in the air. Feng yelling that Gaze was just totally in the way. Licia is huddled up close to Ben, blushing as she adds that even when they're out camping, things were awkward, admitting that she was always worried Gaze might be eavesdropping on them, and she just couldn't stand it because it made her feel so uncomfortable all the time. Varian keeps his friendly smile going. Inside, he's thinking he needs to push them to get more details out of them. So, he casually asks what kind of jobs they actually ended up leaving to Gaze if he was so useless. Hannah starts counting off his chores, getting louder as she mentions things like taking care of the mounts and setting up camp, going on to list item collection, handling potions, shopping, cleaning and doing the laundry, before finally yelling that he even had to deal with disposing of the magic beast. Hannah is still going off, yelling about how slow Gaze was at his job and saying he should have just handled all the dismantling in his free time. Golan jumps back in with a red face, saying that the guy was always just getting in the way and being completely inconsiderate of the rest of them. He keeps the rant going, yelling that if Gazes was hoarding that many items the whole time, he could have at least opened his mouth and said something. Licia chimes in from the side, blushing as she calls Gaze a total closet pervert. The whole group starts ganging up to tell Vayan that they're the only reason the party ever made it to Srank, especially with a beginner class dragging them down. They keep shouting that he should have just done his damn job the right way, like any normal item master would. Varian just sits there with a calm smile, while the party members around him keep laughing and drinking. But as he listens to them talk, he starts to realise that these guys really might be a lost cause after all. His expression stays polite, but inside he's already decided that he's going to have to beat some serious sense into them, leading to a quick note to the readers, confirming that even Master Barian is totally furious about the way they're acting. The narration points out that the Crescent Moon Claws have some absolutely brutal training from the Master waiting for them after this. So, for now, before fault, everyone should probably just let them off with a click of the tongue while they enjoy their last moments of peace. Empty wine bottles and mugs are littered all over the tavern table as Golgan leans in, calling out to Mr. Balin and asking the old man if he's even listening to the story. While his face gets even redder from the drinks, he tells the instructor that he might be seriously underestimating what they can do. He keeps going on, love them, bragging about how much work they've actually been putting in lately, and starts flashing back to their big deathmatch against the Red Cyclops, so claiming that they were the first A-rank party to ever pull off a win against a monster like that back in the day. The memories keep coming as he talks about the time they wiped out an entire nest of hobgoblins, showing how they always took on the nasty, dirty jobs that no other adventurers even wanted to deal with. Golan keeps bragging about their past wins, talking about how they took down the Basilisk Lord of the Abyssal Cave and how they totally crushed the Venom Dungeon. He claims they aren't just muscle and have the brains to match, which Licia and Ben totally agree with. They cheer along with him, yelling about how they're Srank for a reason, and Goljan starts getting even louder as the drinks hit him. He shouts about how their teamwork is the real deal, then suddenly turns around to ask Gaze for backup on the story. He looks over his shoulder. He just stares at the empty space where his former teammate used to stand. Hannah notices him acting weird. She looks at him with a worried face and asks if he's getting a bit too drunk, while Ben just laughs it off from the back. At the gun party, he tells the group there's no way Gazes would ever be around here. Goljan lets out a forced laugh and tells everyone he was just kidding, trying his best to hide how awkward he feels. He takes another big drink from his mug, wondering why he even felt like Gaze was still there with them. Gar starts looking back on everything, and it hits him that maybe things weren't exactly how he remembered, since he was always right there in the middle of the chaos, even taking on goblins and monsters head-on, while the rest of the team realised his support was actually the secret to every win they ever had. Back at the table, Hannah gets a bit tipsy and admits that Gazes really did put in a lot of work. Ben joins in shouting about how impressive it was that a beginner-class guy could actually keep up with them, while Licia starts to wonder if things were deeper than that. Golgan looks totally stressed as he mumbles about how Gaze probably saved them more than once. The mood breaks instantly when a hand slams down hard on the table, splashing drinks everywhere. Golan loses it and screams at everyone to stop whining about the guy they kicked out, his face turning bright red because he claims they're making the booze taste bad with all this talk. He stands there, yelling at his teammates, leaving Licia and Ben completely stunned, while Hannah just looks annoyed, and Vian watches the whole scene fall apart. Guljan stands there looking completely flustered and blushing, unable to get a full sentence out, as he suddenly shouts that he's going to check on the Draconics before bolting out the door, leaving everyone else behind. Miria looks on with a total face of annoyance and asks what his deal even is. Vian just smiles and reminds her that Golgan was actually the first one to bring up Gaze's name, and outside, the moon hangs high in the clouds as the night gets quiet for a moment. Golgan stumbles through the grass, groaning to himself about how he definitely had way too much to drink, but he tries to play it off by thinking he still got it together, bragging to himself about being responsible enough to check the mounts. He keeps the self-praise going, thinking about what a considerate guy he is for doing this, while he starts imagining what Gaze would think of him, even asking out loud if Gaze would agree. This triggers a memory of Gaze from back in the day, looking over his shoulder and asking Guljan what's up. Gaze and Golgan are back in the stables with their mounts. The whole memory is glowing as Golgan yells that they're all going to the tavern to celebrate finally hitting S rank. Gaze just tells him to go on ahead and that he'll catch up with the group later. Guljan tries to get him to come along, arguing that the Drenics can wait for once. Though Gaze won't budge, he doesn't feel right if he skips his routine at this time, because he really believes that good work always comes from having a good life, and he reminds Guljan to never neglect the basics of the job. Golgan walks off, calling him way too preachy, while Gaze just warns him not to stay out too late. Back in the present, Guljan stands alone in the dark, blushing over the memory, and he finally admits to himself that the booze is definitely starting to hit him hard. The booze is really playing tricks on Golan's head. It honestly feels like Gaze is standing right there, wearing that same old hood and looking just as calm as he used to be. Guljan stares at the empty space, remembering how Gaze was always out here taking care of the Drenics around this time. He thinks back on all those boring daily chores that every adventurer is supposed to do, how Gaze would just smile and handle everyone else's share of the work without complaining once. The weight of everything finally starts to get to him, and he looks like he's about to break. He bows his head low to the shadow of his old friend, saying thank you and that he's sorry for everything, standing there in the quiet of the night as the guilt just keeps pouring out. He knows these are the words he should have said while he was sober instead of waiting until now. But the image of Gaze just stays silent, clean, leaving Guljan alone with his thoughts in the dark. Turns out that's not an illusion. The real Gaze actually showed up because he was worried and wanted to check on everyone, and seeing Golan like this has him completely thrown off. Golgan just mumbles to himself, asking what's even happening right now, but Gaze can't believe his ears. He never thought he'd live to hear words like thank you or sorry come out of Golgan's mouth. It's just dead silence between them for a second. Golan stands there, staring, while Gaze watches him from under his hood, and Golgan is so wasted he's convinced the image of Gaze standing in front of him is just a hallucination that won't go away. He tells himself he must still be drunk. He looks straight at his old friend, completely missing the fact that he's actually there. He keeps insisting to himself that there's no way Gaze would be standing here right now. So, he just looks down trying to shake the vision. He keeps repeating that it's impossible and that Gaze would never actually come back to the party after everything that happened. Gaze just stands there listening to him, and the wind blows through the trees under the stars, leaving the two of them in the quiet night. Guljan starts shivering and complaining about how freezing it is out here. He's basically done for the night, asking himself if he should just head back and keep drinking. He walks off, leaving Gaze standing there alone under the stars, just looking up at the night sky. Then someone moves in fast and puts a sword right to his throat, catching him completely off guard. Cuntly off guard. He doesn't even have time to react before the person calls him an intruder for sneaking around at night. Gaze starts sweating. He recognizes the voice and tells the guy it's been a long time. It turns out the man is Vian, and Gaze refers to him as Master. Varian just smiles and tells Gaze that he was actually looking to have a word with him too. Gaze is stuck between Maria and his old instructor, realizing he just walked into a really awkward situation. He's breaking it out in a cold sweat, clearly stressed about what comes next. Gaze stands there looking pretty tense as the night goes on. Things are just starting to heat up with whispers of undead monsters creeping around in the dark. Vian and Gaze face each other under the stable roof. Varian starts laughing and tells Gaze to relax and not be so stiff. He takes a good look at his old student and says it looks like he's actually doing pretty well for himself. Varian smiles, thinking about how youth is all about meeting and eventually moving on from friends your own age. He mentions that it seems like Gaze has been spending a lot of time with a pretty intense, strong-willed group lately. Gaze looks back on his time with Crescent Claw and admits it's true, apologizing for all the trouble they've caused. Varian cuts to the chase. He figures Gaze showed up because he has something heavy on his mind. Gaze stays quiet for a second, just looking down. Vian mentions he heard all about the mess the party made during the guild training and the scene they caused back in town, perhaps which leads Gaze to ask if he's talking about the time the Draconics started rampaging. It turns out there are serious risks when a Draconics is ignored or treated poorly by its writers. Even if they seem tamed, once a magical beast like that starts going wild, it shows the actual rampage is only the beginning of the trouble because the real threat is much grosser and scarier than that. The smell from a stressed Dronix actually pulls in higher-level monsters from all over. In the worst possible case, scent can even bring a dragon down on the town. Varian laughs a bit and says since the store owner gave them a hard time, the party was at least doing the bare minimum to keep the animals calm. So, it seems like everyone managed to avoid a complete nightmare scenario this time. Gaze just stares at his hand on the table, thinking about how bare minimum is all he can expect from them. Gaze stands there with a shovel over his shoulder, ready to get started. He drives the blade deep into the dirt to clear the area. While he works, he thinks about cleaning out the dirty straw and figuring out what food each animal likes best. But even with all that effort, he feels like he still has plenty of room to improve. Varian laughs and says he can't believe the rest of the party just left all the work for Gaze to do alone. So Gaze admits it's mostly because he's completely given up on relying on them for any help. Varian watches him work for a second, looking thoughtful. He says the whole thing reminds him of the big subjugation battles from the old days. He points out that back then, Gaze used to always butt into other people's business and get a real ego about it, and Gaze just laughs it off, remembering how his master gave him a serious earful after that. Varian's voice from the past rings out, telling Gaze to never step into another person's territory. He explains that you can never fully master your own field, so you have to keep chasing it, and above everything else, you always have to show respect to the people around you. Back in the present, Vian realizes that Gaze actually took those old teachings to heart. So Gaze looks away and admits they really should have worked together on the basic stuff like cooking or cleaning. He gives a small smile, mentioning he only did all that because he thought it's what his master taught him, but Varian just sigh, saying the rest of the party should have been able to handle that much on their own honestly. It's not even worth talking about since it's such common sense. He finishes by saying it's never a good idea to just assume things will work out, which leaves Gaze standing alone under the full moon, thinking that maybe he needs to start changing his ways too. Vian tells Gaze not to stress about things too much and mentions that Gaze probably should have pushed back a little harder against his old teammates, but he promises he's going to personally whip the Crescent Moon claws back into shape. Gaze just laughs nervously, thinking about the brutal training coming for his old party, so he realizes it's pretty wild that his own master is the commander of the Royal Knights logistics support. He asks Vian to just take the credit for everything that happened and explains that things are going to get way too messy if people find out he was the one behind it all. Varian starts walking away, thinking about how young people and their complicated problems are a total mystery. He throws out a final offer, telling Gaze he's got a job waiting for him at the Royal Palace, which Gaze just quietly acknowledges while looking off into the distance. Dumia watches the two of them talk with a quiet smile on her face. Gaze looks back and explains he's got a promise to keep with someone first, but says once he's finally on his own, he'll think about the job. Vian just nods along, saying he gets it. And then later that night, under a full moon, a voice calls out for the master. Varian stands in the doorway, scratching his head, telling whoever is there that he's leaving the rest of the mess to them. He looks down at the Crescent Moonclaw members passed out all over the floor and just sigh about how complicated young people can be. The next morning rolls around at the mansion, and Golan is still flat on his back, looking like he's barely surviving the start of the day. The guy is supposed to be the legendary leader of the S-rank party Crescent Moon's Claw, but right now he's just a total wreck. Varian heads out, joking that what Goljan is feeling is a real S-rank hangover. Goljan is struggling hard, trying to tell himself that a legendary S-rank guy like him shouldn't be losing to a hangover. but he's barely conscious when Vian suddenly shows up in the doorway. The old man waves and yells at everyone to wake the hell up. Varian's got a huge smile on his face as he lets them know it's officially time for the morning cleaning. Hannah can't believe they have to do this again today, while Licia just rubs her eyes, saying she's way too sleepy for this. Varian doesn't care and tells them not to get cocky, just because they managed to tidy up for a single day. He walks past the empty bottles on the floor, warning them that if they just keep partying like this, they're going to get the rug pulled out from under them. Ben and the others start bagging up the trash. Vian reminds them that there are no days off when it comes to daily life. He points toward the door and tells Ben and Hannah to take the work outside. So, everyone heads over to the stables where Varian announces that he's going to drill the basics of Draenic's care into their heads. The lesson starts with some gross details. Vian explains that if the beast gets sick from eating the wrong stuff, its piss will show it. Ian keeps the lesson going, explaining that if they don't stay on top of things, the smell of waste and body odour is going to get pretty bad. Miria looks over at Gazes, clearly bothered by the air in the stables, and asks him if he honestly doesn't notice the stench. He just repeats the word, like he's never heard of it before, while Mia admits she just thought this was how things were supposed to smell. He starts wondering if the others are just feeling sick or something, because he hasn't noticed anything weird at all. Vian gets right in his face with a serious look, telling him that his observation skills are definitely starting to slip lately. He gestures toward the draconics in the stall, Dupont warning them that underestimating the care these creatures need will end up costing them big time. With the mood getting heavy, Vian decides it's time to tell them a specific story, a cautionary tale about the dark future that waits for anyone who decides to neglect their basic duties. He starts ranting about tragedy and disaster, telling them they need to take full responsibility for their work before things go south, leaving Gaze and Miria standing there in silence, looking completely stressed out by the old man's intense lecture. Hannah stands by watching while Goljan struggles with the farm equipment, mentioning how much like actual hard labour this is. Varian doesn't let up of them, though, reminding them that Gaze used to handle every bit of this work all by himself. He tells them straight up that since they chose to kick him out, they're the ones who have to step up and take responsibility now. Later on, a simple meal of soup and bread is sat on the table, but between the back-breaking work and a nasty hangover headache, neither of them is in the mood to eat. They just sit there staring at their food, feeling nothing but frustration and regret over how things turned out. Golan is basically in a daze. His mind is a mess of weird emotions, and his body is totally finished, leaving Hannah in the exact same spot, since they're both thinking the same thing about their current situation. The problem is that even though they're both miserable, they can't actually say the words out loud. Goljan just sighs to himself, thinking that even if he's rusty, his pride as an S-rank won't let him admit he can't handle this. Back at the table, Golgan looks up at the ceiling and sighs, wishing Gaze were still around to handle things for them. Hannah and Ben just sit there looking completely wrecked. It looks like their pride is literally starting to crack, and on this day, the sound of someone's ego shattering echoes throughout the building. While back at the campsite, Gas shouts out that it's time to get moving. Whether the world heard that pride break or not, he tells Maria that they've finally finished gathering all the items they need, and now that Maria's mount has joined up with them, 2 Drenics are ready for the trip. Gaze looks at the path ahead and says it's finally time to get going. He suggests they break down the camp immediately so they can start heading toward the dungeon. He starts moving so fast. He's basically in 3 places at once, packing everything up while Mia stands there totally shocked. She watches him work like a machine. He's making the whole process look way too easy. Miria stands there with a huge pout on her face, looking completely annoyed about Gaze, holding all the bags himself. She screams his name to get his attention, and he looks over, looking a little nervous about whatever she's about to say next. She gets a serious look in her eyes and tells him that doing things that way is just not going to work. She gives him a massive smile and says they should do it together, which completely catches Gaze off guard. She leans in close and asks if he's on board, making him blush and smile awkwardly while he stammers out a yes. Over by the mounts, it's clear that just waiting around isn't the way to get your feelings across. No, just waiting definitely won't work if you want someone to understand you. So, Mia finally takes the big plunge and makes her move, and Gaze accepts her offer without a second thought. Gaze and Miria head out together, and it looks like the seeds of trust are finally starting to grow. As they make their way deep into the forest to start their training, Gaze points out that they don't really know how the other one fights yet, and suggests they hit up some hunting grounds to test the waters. Mia is totally down for it, saying she's actually been wanting to show him what she can do. Gaze looks a little awkward and tells her she only needs to follow his lead during a fight. He gets serious for a second and tells her that she absolutely has to do exactly what he says, clarifying that while she's usually free to make her own calls on the fly, she really needs to listen the second she hears his voice. He looks at her and tells her he needs a promise on that, and she just smiles back at him. Miria gives him a big smile and says, of course, she'll listen, and she adds that it's simply because she trusts Gaze. Miria thanks him for the chance, so Gaze tells her it's time to head out. Gaze leads the way on his mount, moving fast through the trees, while he looks back to tell Mia she's doing a great job keeping up. Umria just laughs and tells him he better not underestimate her skills. She looks like she's having a blast, riding through the forest until they finally come across a dark, rocky cave entrance, hidden in the woods. Gaze gets serious again and tells her not to let her guard down, suggesting they keep talking to stay coordinated as they move in, which Mia agrees to. Gaze and Miria ride their mounts straight into the dark cave, moving deeper into the shadows as the light from the forest fades out. The rocky entrance sits quiet among the trees, and then suddenly, these two glowing white eyes show up out of the pitch black. But back in the woods, these tall, wiggly shadow monsters pop out of the ground. One of the shadows starts sliding back down into the dirt with a weird sound. It disappears completely, leaving only one of the creatures standing there while it watches the clearing from the middle of the forest all by itself. Moving on to the town, things are looking pretty normal and chill on the streets, leading up to a fancy balcony where someone seems to be watching from above. Back at the fancy balcony, a silhouette stands by the window, watching as the long-haired man takes a sip of his tea and asks what the situation is. He sits back in his chair, looking totally relaxed while he listens to the report, nodding along and saying he gets it, especially regarding the dungeons with the special variants. Of those weird shadow monsters is standing right there in the room, and he's just there in the room with him, and he just chuckles at it, telling the creature it's actually become pretty impressive. He stands up and looks out the window, saying he wants to test their power a little more, mentioning he might even make that dungeon a bit tougher while he's out for a walk. He tells the shadow monster it's dismissed, and the creature starts sinking into the floor, vanishing as he gives one last order to keep him updated on everything that's happening. The mysterious man just stands there with a dark smile on his face, thinking to himself about how Gaze has grown up and looks delicious now. He figures that all the stuff Gaze did out in the world was actually a big deal. He wants Gaze to remember that running away isn't an option anymore. His eyes get real intense as he says he's definitely coming for him, so he better wait. And he touches his face while calling Gaze his precious little favourite. The voice keeps echoing Gaze's name over the quiet town, drifting right over the roof of the local, in where things are a mess. Inside, Golgan and his crew are face down on the table, completely wrecked. Big Varian just laughs at them and says to get up because they're heading out today. Vian gives a big grin and tells the group it's finally time to let out all that hidden power, but Gaze and Mia just sit there at the table, looking like they haven't slept in days. Outside the building, the announcement goes out that combat training is officially starting, and Ben is already in his gear, looking way more excited than he probably should be. He tells himself he's not going to let Gaze take all the glory and stay the main character, while Golgan stands there looking sharp, totally focused on proving they still deserve that S-rank title. Hannah and Licia are right behind them, looking serious, and ready to actually get some results this time. The weather is perfect as the clouds drift over the training grounds, and Ben starts screaming at the top of his lungs about how they're going to crush this training, with Golgan joining in, yelling for the forest wolves to bring it on because he's ready for anything. The group looks out at a field filled with rows of wooden training dummies, and Licia can't believe her eyes, asking Vian if this is some kind of joke, since they're supposed to be pros. Varian just leans on the fence and tells them he can't just pull magical beasts out of thin air. So, they're starting with dummies first, which makes Hannah feel like they're being totally disrespected. Lan tells the rest of the party to just hurry up and get this over with, while Vian just laughs and says he's actually looking forward to seeing what they've got. He slams an hourglass onto the table and gives them 3 minutes to take the target down. Digut then yells for them to begin, sending the whole party into their combat stances immediately. Licia starts chanting for a speed boost while Hannah gets her flame scatter shot ready to go. And Ben charges straight ahead, yelling that taking the lead is exactly what he's there for. Licia finishes her chant and sends a wave of support magic toward Goljan, who gears up to move, feeling the rush of the speed boost Licia just gave him. He figures he can use this momentum to flank the targets from the opposite side of where Ben is charging, planning to take them all out with a sudden quick attack as he zips across the field toward the group of training dummies. Hannah watches him go and can't even believe her eyes, saying he's moving way too fast for her. But just then, a massive explosion rips through the air and someone yells for Golan to get out of the way, leaving him completely stunned as he looks over at the sudden blast he didn't see coming. He sees another one coming straight for him and starts losing it. He carters, wondering how this is happening again right as the energy hits the ground and erupts into a huge cloud of smoke and fire. Golan starts flailing around and swearing as he tries to scramble away before he gets caught in the mess. Golgan realizes he's completely stopped moving in the middle of the chaos. He grits his teeth, telling himself he's got to catch up right now or he's going to fail. So, he lets out a huge yell and puts every bit of strength he has left into one final desperate swing. Durationed, he and Ben both slam into the training dummy at the exact same moment, their weapons clashing against the wood with a loud crack as they both just freeze their eyes wide and totally shocked by the mess they just made of their coordination. Varian calls out from the sidelines, telling them that's enough for today. While Hannah and Licia just stand there watching the disaster, the training dummy D stands alone in the field, barely holding together after the rough practice session. The party members hang their heads and start walking back toward the fence, feeling the weight of how badly things are going. And Varian meets them there, mentioning how they actually managed to work together as a real team up until this point. He looks them over and asks what they think they're lacking right now. Specifically, what's gone missing that's making them fall apart, leaving Hannah staring at the ground, sweating as she wonders if the missing piece is actually Gaiest. Varian looks up at the sky with a calm smile, telling the group that their guess is only half right. Ben stands there, looking completely lost, asking what exactly it was that Gaze was doing for them. While Licia tries to think it through, Ben just stares off and says he's starting to wonder about it too. Goljan looks down as a specific memory hits him, and he finally realizes Gazes was calling out instructions. He remembers the whole group standing together back in the day when things actually worked. Goljan repeats the idea of calling out like it's a totally new concept he's just now getting. He starts looking focused again, telling the rest of the team they need to review how they were moving, pointing out how Ben used to start every fight by attacking from the right side. He then remembers how Hannah would always follow that up by casting a massive area of effect spell, and at the same time, Licia would make sure to hit Golan with a speed boost buff to keep the momentum going. Golan keeps thinking back to their old rhythm, remembering how he'd wait for the right buff before attacking from the side opposite of Ben. Truth is starting to hit the whole group now as they realize everyone was just doing their own thing, based on their own judgment. So, it was really just a matter of time before they all started getting in each other's way and clashing. Golan finally gets it, admitting that the only reason they could fight perfectly without any issues before was because Gaze was always there, reading the whole battlefield and feeding them the orders they needed to stay together. Varian gives a satisfied smile. In Golan, it looks like he's finally matured enough to realize that and put it into words. Golan takes a second to process everything, then says that from here on out, what they really need to do is Hannah jumps in, explaining that they have to start calling out to each other and being clear about which targets they're hitting. Licia looks pumped up as she adds that they need to pay attention to how everyone is moving so they can read the situation and actually build some teamwork. Even Ben just stands there with a big grin, totally on board with the new plan. The Crescent Claw party stands together in the clearing. Finally on the same page and looking ready, Golgan stares ahead with a serious look, admitting it's not going to be easy. They've got to learn how to move as a real team. While nearby, Mia watches them with a quiet smile, thinking to herself that she's not ready to face Gazes just yet. The whole group gets fired up with the girls shouting that they can do this and Goljan rallying everyone to give it their best shot. Varian just laughs at their energy, telling them he likes that spirit. He warns them that he's going to keep them training for as many days as it takes to get it right, and the group shouts back their agreement. The scene shifts over to a rocky cliffside where things are already getting intense because a pack of goblins comes charging out. weapons raised and screaming as they look for an opening. Mia doesn't hesitate for a second, leaping high into the air and coming down right on top of them. And as she starts cutting through the pack, Gaze shouts out that he's got her back. Miria stays on the move, cutting through the monsters as she yells to wipe out the whole group they lured here in one go. Gaz shouts back that he's on it, his boots hitting the ground hard as he moves into position. Mia leaps way up into the air to stay above the chaos and keep the pressure on. She actually lets out a little laugh, clearly feeling good about how the fight is going. While she keeps the pack distracted, Gaze makes his way up the rocky ridge to get a clear line of sight. He draws his bow back, fixing his eyes on the targets below and getting ready to let it fly. Gaze lets loose a magic bow skill called Rapid Fire, and a storm of arrows rains down, tearing right through the goblins. Mia follows up immediately with her own special move, Diamond Dust, shooting through the air and freezing everything in her path. Lyciada just stands there, taking it all in, watching how perfectly the two of them work together. With the pack completely wiped out, the aeroclade goes quiet, leaving a massive pile of monsters in the middle of the trail. Miria looks over the cleared area and mentions that they probably got every last goblin in the cave. And Gazes watches her for a second before telling her she's really gotten strong lately. He points out how her fighting style is totally different now, compared to back when she was just a mage. Miria gets all bashful and tries to play it down, saying it's really not that big of a deal. She can't hide her pride, as she mentions how hard she's been training, and privately she thinks about all those hours spent hitting the training dummy just to be worthy of him. Actually fighting right next to him is what really proves it to her. Just going over everything he does, like his wide vision, his split-second judgment, and his throwing skills. To anyone else, they might look like basic moves, but she knows they're all actually top tier, and she smiles to herself, realizing there isn't anyone this reliable, even among the A-rank pros she's seen. The cave ceiling is all cracked and rocky above them, and down below, a warm pot of stew is bubbling away over the campfire. Gaze and Miria take a break from the hunt to set up camp with Sucra watching over them as Mia looks at the fire and wonders out loud how long it's been since they started this. And she thinks about how great it is that they're finally working for themselves and each other. Gaze catches her vibe and smiles, saying that this kind of quiet moment is actually really nice. He mentions they've definitely hit up a lot of different hunting spots lately. Then he tells her that once they get back to town tomorrow and get everything ready, Storming Day, Mia gets excited and asks if that means they're finally going to hit the actual dungeon. Gaze just looks at her with a confident grin, looking totally ready for whatever comes next. Gaze looks at their camping gear and says he knows they'll be just fine together, and Mia realizes she can finally say that with total confidence now. She looks at him with this really soft, happy look in her eyes as Gaze agrees with her. She looks up at him, feeling completely supported. Mia explains that whenever she's out there fighting right by his side, all of her fear just completely disappears, leaving her feeling bold. Gaia scratches his head and asks if that's actually a good thing. She tells him it definitely is. She feels it way more with him than she ever did with any other group, because his advice keeps her focused and makes her feel like she can dodge anything. As the stew bubbles away, she tells him that being a team just feels really good. Stands there, looking genuinely touched, a soft smile spreading across his face as he repeats her words with a little laugh, asking if being together really feels that good. And he lets it slip that in all his time adventuring. Girls, no one has ever said anything like that to him before. Mida just giggles and tells him that feeling this confident is just a special perk of being an attacker. The two of them settle in for the night, sitting by the warm glow of the campfire inside the cave, while they share a quiet moment just looking at each other, feeling totally at ease. Suddenly, the silence breaks when she announces that the stew is finally done. So, they look down at the steaming pot full of meat and vegetables, and Gaze takes his first big bite, looking completely shocked by how amazing it tastes. He can't believe it, thinking to himself that the flavour is so much richer than anything he's ever made. At the campfire, Mia explains her secret ingredient. She says she adds butter, which is why the flavour is so much better than what he's used to. The next morning rolls around and the sun is high over the buildings. Looks like a perfect day for training. Down in the training area, a forest wolf lies slumped over on the ground, totally defeated after the rookies finally finished it off. The group of young adventurers cheers at the top of their lungs, looking pretty proud of themselves for winning. Right then, the announcement goes out that the Magic Beast extermination drill is officially over and the lead rookie warrior is pumped. He tells his team that they can finally start taking on real dungeons now. The guild clerk watches them from the counter and gives a polite nod, giving the kids congratulations on passing. But then a massive sound rings out through the streets. The guys freeze up like they just saw a ghost, and it turns out to be a giant monster, locked in a massive cage, being pulled through town by a team of Dranics. Cray watches the beast go by while everyone around starts panicking. They're asking what that roar was, and can't believe how huge the thing is. The massive beast snarls as it's paraded through the streets. Someone mentions that this monster is actually used for training, but the rookies can't believe their ears. The warrior yells out in total disbelief, while the guy next to him wonders who could possibly beat a thing like that. The guild clerk just keeps smiling and lets them know there's an adventurer currently doing some special training right now, and out in the field, the beast is absolute chaos. It lunges forward with a massive claw swipe aimed right at Ben. Alicia stays focused and shouts that the defense buffs are all set. Ben feels the power and says he can tank this hit, no problem. So, Hannah sees the opening and screams for Golan to take his shot. Everything is lined up perfectly for the leader to step up. Golan gets a determined look on his face and tells the rest of the party to leave everything to him. He leaps into the air and pulls his swords back. He's putting everything he's got into his special skill to finish the fight. He brings the blade down in a massive flash, hitting right through the air and landing a heavy blow. The beast's head snaps back from the force of the strike. Looks like the S-rank party is finally showing off. The sky is clear over the training area. As the practice session ends, the beast lies dead on the ground while the group catches their breath. Varian looks at them with a smile and says that is enough for today, telling them they have finally mastered the basics of being adventurers, including everything from teamwork to clean up. He goes on to say that with their current skills, he wouldn't be worried about sending them on a real quest. Ben yells out in excitement while Hannah says they are finally ready to take on a dungeon together. Varian watches them, thinking to himself that this is really just the starting line. But he tells the group out loud that they have all truly changed since they started this. Hannah smiles at her leader and says she knew Golgan could do it if he actually tried. And Golgan acts cool, thinking it was her cheering that really fired up his heart to finish the job. Leisha looks at Ben with a big smile and tells him his back looked even bigger than usual today. Ben just laughs it off, saying that a tank is pretty much useless without something to protect. Varian watches the group's friendly flirting and teamwork with a warm look on his face. He lets out a satisfied sigh as he realizes how far they've actually come since the start. Interrupting the moment, Fian yells for them to hurry up and go file their application with the guild. The scene shifts to the center of town where the massive guild building stands under the bright morning sky. The 4 members of Crescent Claw stand together looking focused and ready to get back to work. But as they walk by, people start whispering, asking if that's really them, and saying they thought the group vanished. One in the crowd mentions hearing they've been spotted training at the practice grounds and hunting fields lately. Though another guy isn't convinced, saying no matter how hard they work, they can't just erase their past mess-ups. Dorian just smiles at all the chatter, mentioning how much young people love their gossip. As they walk along toward the guild counter, they step up to the desk, catching the clerk totally off guard for a second. The clerk quickly realizes who he's looking at, greeting the members of Crescent Claw and Master Berean with a smile. He tells them they did a great job with their training and asks what else he can do to help them out today. Berean gets straight to the point, telling the clerk he's sending the group to clear out that one specific dungeon. The clerk adjusts his glasses and says he understands exactly which one Varian means, while Hannah and Licia look a bit confused. Hannah asks him to clarify Sukar which dungeon he's actually talking about. The clerk explains that it's a B-rank spot, but things are weird there because they've seen special monsters that don't match the local species. He goes on to say that nobody has been able to clear it yet, and it's becoming a serious issue because it's just been left alone for so long. Golgan looks pretty uneasy and says that sounds like a creepy story. While Vian just stands there laughing, Varian keeps talking, explaining that this whole thing is a total headache for the guild since the rewards aren't good enough for high rankers. And yet, the actual work is way too much for anyone B rank or lower to handle, which is why they're thinking about bumping up the difficulty level. Golgan listens to the explanation and starts putting the pieces together. He realizes that this specific dungeon is basically the perfect chance for them to prove themselves and make a comeback. Ben looks pretty pumped about the plan, looking straight ahead and telling the crew it's time to get moving. The group heads out together, totally ignoring all the drama and gossip people in town have been spreading about them. They're focused on one thing, hitting this dungeon raid and finally clearing their names once and for all. Gul'jan leads the way with plenty of confidence, ready to face whatever weird undead stuff is waiting for them inside. The party pulls up to the massive stone doors of the dungeon entrance, sitting on their mounts. Golan looks up at the entrance and Ben starts laughing in the back, both of them ready to finally get this clear started. Golan keeps his eyes on the prize, while Ben shouts out that it's been a minute since they've been on a real raid. Varian tells the crew to get their heads in the game and brace themselves. But Licia admits she's actually starting to get a little shaky, which is the total opposite of Hannah, who's hyped because she can finally go all out and fire off as much magic as she wants. The whole group stands together as the heavy gates start to move. The raid is finally happening. Whenever someone shows up with enough heart to actually challenge this place, the massive stone doors respond by swinging wide open for them. This is the dungeon, a place where the normal rules of the world don't really apply anymore. Glowing eyes watch from the dark as monsters wait to jump out from every corner. But even if they get taken down, the dungeon eventually just sucks their remains back into the walls. There's no such thing as day or night in here either. The whole place just stays bright 24/7. Dungeons aren't simple. They don't just have one fixed entrance, and instead tend to just pop up randomly wherever they want. Getting back out is just as tricky, because there are actually only a couple of ways to make it out of a dungeon alive. The first way out is to find a specific magic circle hidden somewhere inside that links back to the outside world. The second option is to track down the dungeon boss, kill it, and then destroy the glowing core tucked away inside its body. Or, if a party manages to just grab the core, the dungeon counts as cleared and everyone gets warped outside instantly. Gul'jan and Hannah lead the group deeper into the tunnels on their mounts. As they travel, someone brings up the rumours they heard about a special variant monster possibly lurking nearby, which makes Hannah speak up, asking why exactly the details on this thing are so vague and hard to understand. She barely finishes her sentence before she stops. Something is definitely changing in the air around them. Licia puts her scouting skills to use, being completely stressed as she says she's picking up a heavy vibe that smells like failure. A massive scaly foot with sharp claws slams down hard against the stone floor. 3 reptilian monsters called psychos crawl out of the dark and close in. Gul'jan yells out that it's a magic beast. While Hannah looks on, starting to get a really bad feeling, she covers her mouth and says the smell is all wrong. Realizing something is definitely off about these things, Varian starts sweating, asking if this thing is actually a half undead, since there was nothing about that in any of the reports. He warns the group that their usual way of fighting isn't going to cut it against an enemy like this, but Gul'jan just gives a confident look, saying it doesn't matter if it's a half-breed or whatever. He draws his sword and says an undead opponent is the perfect chance for him to show everyone what he can really do. Varian just watches him with a surprised look, waiting to see how the guy is going to handle the situation, especially since Gul'jan is a paladin, basically a Hyle knight who got a special blessing from all those years of intense training. Gul'jan's slashes naturally have a holy attribute, so he doesn't even need to use any extra enchantments. And since that holy power is the one big weakness for undead monsters, he's basically the perfect counter. A normal party would be having a rough time in a spot like this. But this is the moment where Gul'jan, holy knight and lead fighter of the Crescent Claw party, starts showing off some crazy power that's way beyond what anyone else can do. He yells for everyone to keep the pressure on, calling out for a lightning-fast attack. The rest of the group follows his lead, with Ben raising his weapon and getting ready to charge in. Golan lets out a shout as he swings his blade in a massive, wide circle, tearing right through the monster as he rides past it on his mount, and he stops just ahead, looking back at his party while the dust from the fight starts to settle. The group is just breezing through the challenge like it's nothing. And Vian watches with a big smile, thinking the whole thing is actually pretty impressive. Turns out all that training really paid off, since the Crescent Claw party has their coordination down perfectly. Even an expert like Vian is stuck watching in awe as they just mow down every monster in their path. It's been like this since they first started heading down into the dungeon. Now, 3 full days have passed since they began. The team is finally taking a breather at a small campsite they set up in the ruins. Ben mentions they've already cleared 5 floors. Since it's only a B rank spot, they should be almost done. But then Hannah looks around the camp and asks where Gergen is hiding. One of them points out that Gergen just went to go grab some water a second ago. Licia looks back at Hannah, who's got a really serious look on her face. Hannah stares down at her drink and says that since they've made it this far alone, they finally get just how much Gaze was actually doing to look out for them. She looks off into the distance, mentioning how much she wants him to see how they've grown. Though she admits to herself that asking him to come back is just a selfish wish. She thinks that at the very least she wants to really make a big name for the Crescent Claw party. She honestly hopes that somehow somewhere out their Gazes ends up hearing about it. Hannah has this look of pure determination in her eyes as she makes this silent promise. But before any of that, she knows they have to focus on clearing this dungeon safely. One yells out that dinner is ready, catching Goljan totally off guard as he shouts back that he's on his way. But the scene suddenly shifts back to the dark stone entrance of the dungeon where things are taking a turn. Higan and the girls look completely stressed out, while Vian just stands there laughing like it's a joke. A flaming horse monster charges forward and someone points out that a really troublesome creature just showed up. Ben loses it, finding out that the thing is actually a nightmare while Licia panics, wondering why a monster like that would even be in a B-rank dungeon. The nightmare is a total freak of nature that literally eats the minds of anyone who gets too close. And once it hits you, game over. You just slowly die without ever waking up again. Golan and Gaze stand their ground, but they both know they're in deep trouble. Golan and Ben get ready for the fight, but Golan admits it isn't his first time facing one of these. It's just that Gaze was always there to help before, and he knows that trying to fight this thing like a normal monster is going to be a real nightmare. He starts doubting himself, wondering if he can even pull this off without Gaze's support to lean on. Hannah notices him overthinking and asks what he's doing, just brooding there all by himself. She looks totally unbothered, asking if the plan is basically just to blow the horse's head off, which completely catches Goljan off FG guard. He just stares at her, realizing she's not scared at all, and then Licia speaks up next. She's a little shaky, but says she's been thinking of a way to handle this too. She suggests they use Hannah's ice magic to clear a path through the flames, and promises to keep a holy barrier up to protect everyone while Ben gets fired up in the background. Ben jumps right into action, shouting that he'll take the front line to lead the charge. Ben gets his armor settled and tells the rest of the group he's counting on them for backup if anything goes wrong. And Goljan just looks at Ben and Licia in total shock. He can't believe how ready they are to jump in, making him realize that he'd actually become pretty timid lately, without even noticing it. He starts thinking about how he can't keep chasing Gaze's shadow forever. He knows he needs to move on, especially since it's clear now that he isn't fighting this battle all by himself. He looks at his team and finally feels like he has people he can actually lean on again. Ben says the plan is officially set, and Licia yells for everyone to get moving as Ben locks in and starts the charge with a look of total focus. Licia stays right behind him, calling out her special skill to set up a bunch of barriers. And then she uses her support magic to hide their approach so they can get the jump on the enemy. The nightmare monster rears up, looking huge and dangerous, but Ben just stands his ground right in front of it. Hannah and Golgan lock eyes and focus up, getting ready to start a massive combined spell together. As the wind starts swirling around them, Licia watches from the side while the two of them stand perfectly in sync. They're both totally determined to go all out, thinking they're going to hit these things with every bit of power they've got. Golan starts the chant, calling on the holy light to dwell within his blade, while Hannah gathers her mana and calls out to the freezing air to join the attack. They're working like a well-oiled machine again, and they command the energy to take the form they want and clear a path right through the chaos. Golgan yells for the magic to go forth and just wipe out every enemy in their way. Then Hannah unleashes her icicle road spell, creating a frozen path that leads straight to the target. Golan follows through with a Saintma slash, catching the nightmare in a massive explosion of light and steel. The nightmare gets caught right in the middle of the massive blast. Hannah shouts that this is the final hit to end the fight. Everything goes up in a huge explosion, leaving nothing but smoke as the last bits of the beast fade away into the air. Varian starts laughing and tells them they did a great job. Goljan says things went well, while Hannah says it was easy with their teamwork. Varian looks out over the area while the smoke finally clears out, and he thinks to himself about how easily they managed to drop a nightmare. He realizes the group is actually a lot more powerful than he thought, and he admits that finding a monster that's strong in this dungeon was just rotten luck. Sukri thinks about how this isn't impossible. Having a half-undead monster show up changes things, and he knows for sure that something is seriously wrong with this dungeon. Varian looks into the dark and mentions they should be hitting the bottom floor soon. He realizes some annoying pests have been following them the whole way. He tells himself it's best to stay on guard as he walks Sukra past the rest of the group. The stone stairs lead even deeper into the dark, where Golgan is busy hacking through a bunch of flying monsters in the middle of all the dust. Later on, the crew sits around a fire to grab a meal and some drinks to recharge. Everyone eventually just passes out on the floor to get some rest. Golan keeps moving on Sucre's back and says they've finally made it to the spot. The group finally makes it down to the bottom floor, staring at the massive stone door ahead. Alicia mentions she's starting to get a bit nervous about what's waiting inside. Ben agrees, saying he never really gets used to the weird tension right before a boss fight. They keep moving down the stairs together, staying close as they reach the final level. Golgan suddenly stops and tells everyone to wait because something feels off. Hannah narrows her eyes and says she can actually sense someone else nearby. So, the whole party goes quiet, looking around the dark hallway for any signs of movement. Golgan decides to take the lid and tells Hannah to stay back and support him, and she quickly lets him know she's ready to go. Golgan draws his sword and hugs the stone wall, carefully peeking around the corner. Golgan lunges forward with his sword drawn, moving with intense speed, but his blade gets blocked instantly by a dark-haired guy holding a dagger. Both of them freeze up as they lock eyes. Neither one can believe who they're looking at. The rest of the group stops right behind Golgan. Totally caught off guard, Delan yells out Gaze's name in total disbelief while Gaze just stands his ground, and then a heavy silence falls over the hallway as the two sides just stare. Golgan starts sweating, thinking to himself about how incredibly awkward this whole situation turned out. Spiraling, wondering why Gaze is even here, while Vian just stands in the back, laughing. And that's when it clicks for Golan that his master was the one who set this whole meeting up. He figures the old man must have tracked both their location through the guild records to make this happen. Golan is sweating bullets as he realizes Varian planned this entire awkward run-in from the start, and Hannah isn't making it any easier, yelling at him to stop standing there and actually say something. Golgan starts panicking, frantically wondering what he's even supposed to do or say in a spot like this. Licia chimes in too, telling her leader that he needs to pull himself together and act right, while Hannah adds that he needs to make a good impression since the confrontation has already started. He takes a second to clear his throat, trying his best to shake off the nerves and look cool. His greeting to Gaze is incredibly stiff as he struggles to find any way to explain himself. Then he suddenly flips a switch and acts like a cheerful TV host, asking Gaze what he's doing at the dungeon. Gaze just stands there with a blank look on his face, totally confused by how weird his old leader is being. The rest of the party can only watch from the back, looking completely exhausted by the embarrassing scene. Golgan starts freaking out, yelling that he totally messed up his big moment. Gaze just stands there looking completely exhausted by the guy's energy. Mia steps up and asks Gazes what's wrong, seeing the weird vibe from the group, but as soon as she speaks, the entire old party freezes up with bug eyes. Gaze keeps it simple and tells the group that her name is Mia and mentions he only met her after they all parted ways. Golgan and Hannah both lose it, yelling about how Gaze is actually travelling with a girl while someone in the back whispers trying to figure out who she is. Hannah asks if they really came all this way with just 2 people, thinking it's a bit much. But Licia is just standing there blushing, thinking that Mia is super cute. Licia keeps gushing in the background about how cute Mia is, which is awkward because Gaze and Mia can hear every single word they're saying. Gaze gets things back on track by explaining their goal is to get a magic sword here. He plans on sticking with Maria as her support even after the job is done. Golgan is completely shocked to hear this, acting like it's some big revelation, but then he softens up, saying he's just glad Gazes isn't out there all alone. Gaze just laughs and tells him that he was thinking the exact same thing, adding that it's just good to see that the whole old crew is doing all right. He smiles and admits he was actually pretty worried about how they'd manage, but that really hits a nerve with Hannah, who asks if he actually just said he was worried. Hannah goes off on him, yelling about how the whole situation after he left was a total nightmare, and she adds that if he was going to dump all his items on them, he should have at least left a note. He finally admits it was mostly their fault for skipping the official handover, while Golgan just stands there, realizing that things have gotten pretty awkward. He's stuck thinking about how they just had this big emotional goodbye, only to run into him again right away. The pressure is getting to him so much that he can't even think of what to say. Hannah catches him acting weird and fidgeting like crazy, so she calls out to him and asks why he's being so quiet all of a sudden. He tries to explain that when it comes to gaze, he's just completely lost for words, but Hannah just looks at him and asks how he really feels about seeing his old friend again. Golan looks down with a heavy expression, clearly carrying a lot on his mind, and he finally starts to speak, telling Gaze that he really wants him to watch their fight. But that's not all. He adds that he wants Gaze to fight alongside them once more, and he bows his head low, saying he just wants the chance to apologize properly for everything. Hannah watches from the side with a small smile while Golgan struggles to find the right words. So she gives him a little nudge and tells him to just go ahead and say what he needs to. Golan calls out to him, which makes Gaze turn around and ask what's on his mind. The party leader takes a second to steady himself, looking more determined than before, and he asks if they can do this one more time, officially inviting Gaze to join the party again. Gaze just stands there completely shocked by the offer. Gaze stands there, looking completely confused, only managing to let out a surprise sound as he tries to process what he just heard. Golgan keeps going, explaining that their goal is simple and they just want to clear this dungeon with him. He even offers Gaze everything they find. The loot drops and the magic sword they picked up are all his. He tells Gaze that he wants him to judge how strong they've gotten and help them out in the fight, which leaves Gaze totally speechless. Shuba, Muria watches from the side as Gaze starts to sweat, barely able to get a word out because the offer is so unexpected. She looks at him and wonders what he's going to do, while Gaze thinks back to everything that happened with this group. It feels weird to even think about fighting alongside the same people who kicked him out in the first place. But he knows that if Golgan hadn't been so sincere about it, he probably would have just turned him down on the spot. For the real reason Gaze is having such a hard time saying no right now is because he can see how serious Golan is just by looking into his eyes. And it's clear the guy really means what he's saying. Varian looks at Gaze's and acknowledges that this whole situation probably feels like it came out of nowhere, so he gets right to the point. He asks Gaze if he's interested in seeing what his old teammates can actually do now. Gaze just stands there looking confused, repeating the words true power, like he can't quite believe what he's hearing. Varian just laughs and mentions that even a veteran like him had to put in a ton of effort to get them into shape. He's pretty blunt about it too. He tells Gaze that the group used to be honestly pathetic in a lot of ways, leaving Hannah and Lycia looking totally embarrassed, while he explains that most people like them never bother to change. But the Crescent Claw members didn't let the talk around them get to their heads. They actually listened to his coaching and worked themselves to the bone. Varian points out that they handled this entire dungeon conquest completely on their own without any help from him or Gaze's. And it's clear they've reached this level purely through their own hard work. They aren't just riding on anyone's coattails anymore. The whole party stands together looking ready for anything. Vian tells Gaze that this isn't the same team he remembers. Gaze takes a second to process everything. Vian just told him about the party's growth and finally says he understands. So, he suggests they all team up right now to finish clearing out the rest of the dungeon together. Even the Draconic's mounts are happy to see each other again. One of them says it's been way too long, while the other asks how things have been going lately. Hannah smiles as she realizes it really has been a while since they last fought side by side with Gaze like this, and she points out that the fact he and Mia made it this far alone proves they're top-tier adventurers, which has Ben getting hyped and saying he's counting on them. Gaze just laughs and tells them to knock it off, acting humble and saying he's in no spot to be looking down on anyone, because truth is, he actually had a pretty tough time dealing with some of the monsters on the way down here. Monsters like the psychos and those flaming half-undead nightmares that Hannah says are way too powerful to even be inside a normal Barank dungeon. She asks if Gaze ran into those things too, and when he says he did, he finally opens up a bit, saying, honestly, he was starting to worry that just him and Mia wouldn't be enough to take down the final boss on their own. Gus starts breaking down the situation, saying that if they were to actually re-evaluate the rank of this place, there's absolutely no doubt that the boss waiting behind those big doors is S-rank material. The rest of the group stops what they're doing to listen to him. And as things settle down, Licia turns her attention to Miria and asks if she's the one who's been travelling around with gazies. Hannah stands off to the side with her arms crossed, giving the new girl a pretty skeptical look, while Miria just smiles and introduces herself, explaining that she's Gaze's companion and an official party member. She tells them her name is Mia and lets them know she's a magic swordswoman, but Hannah just lets out a bored huff, acting like she isn't exactly blown away by the news. She tells Maria to just try her best and make sure to add that she better not end up dragging the rest of them down. Miria doesn't say anything back, but her face goes totally blank as the comment clearly hits a nerve. Mia doesn't take the insult lying down and says that unlike a certain S-rank party, she actually trains every day, so there's really no need for concern. She even adds that she's worried the big sis senior's instincts might have gotten rusty since her last dungeon run. Hannah lets out a fake laugh and tells Mia she has a big mouth for a mere jack of all trades, but she follows it up with a threat, telling Mia to be careful her fire magic doesn't turn that long hair into a frizzy perm. Miria just smiles and asks if that means Hannah lacks confidence in her own magic control, which really strikes a nerve. She tells Hannah to just stay in the back and keep her elbows warm while the real work gets done. Hannah loses her cool and tells Mia not to underestimate the firepower of a black mage. She makes sure to remind the girl that she's the main damage dealer of the Crescent Claw party, and that Mia should just focus on running around and cleaning up the trash mobs in the back. The two of them end up in a heated stare-down, growling at each other while sparks fly between them. Licia gets all hyped up and tells the guys to back off since this is a woman's battle, and she won't let anyone get in the middle, while Ben just stands there, looking completely drained by the whole situation. Dolan finally chimes in to get everyone back on track, reminding the group that they're actually supposed to be having a strategy meeting before they head in. The whole crew gathers up in front of the massive door. They look like a real team again, sitting there with their mounts, waiting for the word to move. Licia looks around and mentions how the place actually has a pretty nice and calm vibe to it, which is when Ben starts thinking about how much things have shifted. Realizing this isn't the same version of Crescent Claw he used to know, and he realizes it's not just the others. He's changed a lot himself since they all started out together. Gaze looks at his former party members and tells them he's ready to show them exactly how much he's grown since they kicked him out. Goljan gets a serious look in his eyes and says the plan is finally ready, asking the group if they're actually prepared for this. Gaze just smirks at him and says it's a little late to be asking if they're ready now that they're standing at the door. The two of them stand side by side facing the entrance, and Gaze lets him know he's got his back no matter what happens inside. It turns out someone messed with the monsters in this dungeon, giving them all undead powers that weren't there before, and this dark energy was so strong it turned everything from the psychos to the nightmares into half-undead freaks. Based on how things look, the team is expecting to find some kind of high-level undead boss sitting at the end. So an S-rank monster is just waiting in the dark for Crescent Claw to finally walk through those doors. The group stands together in front of the massive stone entrance, taking a second to look at what they're up against. And Gazes mentions that the pressure coming from the other side of the wall is seriously insane. Goljan tells everyone not to chicken out now and reminds them they're sticking to the plan they made. The small fry monsters start swarming in before they can even move, so Golan yells for Ben to get up front and handle it. Ben locks in and gets ready to use his heavy shield knight skill to hold the line for the group. He lets out a huge shout using his provoke skill to make sure every single monster focus on him instead of his friends. Ben jumps right into the middle of the mess, holding his shield high to block the first wave of monsters. Licia isn't wasting any time either. She triggers a High Priest special skill to drop a massive barrier around the group. The plan is for Ben to stay out of the main offensive so he can keep the small fry distracted and just focus on tanking hits. While Licia handles all the behind-the-scenes work, she's busy debuffing the monsters while keeping everyone's health up and giving them buffs. The whole fight kicks off, with everyone perfectly in sync. But then it's clear the party members aren't the only ones doing the heavy lifting here. Draconic's mounts charge down the stone hallway, screaming and ready to tear something apart. These magic beasts are total powerhouses, and they start ripping through enemies with their teeth and claws, just letting their wild instincts take over. With the mounts and Ben keeping the crowd busy, the rest of the team finds an opening and sprints straight for the lick. Gergen and his crew charge ahead without a single doubt, completely trusting that their backs are covered while Gaze keeps pace. Gaze mentioning how the rest of the party has really grown attached to Gergen. Gergen looks focused, replying that they aren't the same people who used to dump all their problems on Gaze anymore. Gaze just gives a small smile, seeing how much his old friend has actually changed. Gergen locks onto the skeletal monster ahead, saying they need to focus on taking down the big threat right in front of them. He gets hyped up and yells back in agreement as he prepares to go all out. And then Gergen swings with everything he's got, slamming a heavy physical hit right into the monster. It turns out a lick can actually condense its magic until it's solid, wearing the energy like a heavy cloak. That thick layer of magic acts just like a shield. That since it's made of pure mana, it's strong enough to just shrug off Gergen's holy attacks like they're nothing. Even with Gergen's heavy swing, it looks like the initial attack didn't really do anything. But right then, the lick suddenly stops moving. The rest of the party sees their chance, timing things perfectly as Hannah focuses everything she has. Her spell is almost ready to go, and she looks completely locked in while holding her staff high. She starts the final chant, calling out that she's taking command by her own authority. She tells the flames and the lightning to start moving, asking for a massive storm to drop down and burn away all the evil in front of her. Hannah shouts the name of her ultimate move, Insanity Lightning Rain. A crazy amount of energy just starts pouring down on the lick. The monster gets absolutely hammered by the lightning bolts are hitting it from every direction. The whole area just lights up in this massive explosion of magic and sound that seems like it should have finished it. As the smoke starts to clear, Hannah stands her ground and watches to see if it worked, only to see the monster still there. Turns out the lick managed to put up a magic barrier right as the spell hit, protecting itself from that massive roaring attack. Hannah's high-tier thunder magic ends up failing to take the monster down, but Mia just smirks, as if saying she's been waiting for this exact moment to move in. She moves like a blur, drawing her sword as she closes the gap, putting every bit of her strength into one massive high-speed swing while her blade connects and sends a huge burst of light through the lick. She lands a perfect critical hit using the opening from the earlier attacks. So, the lick actually takes some real damage for the first time today. The monster looks like it's completely done playing around. It's furious, and suddenly it lets out this insane wave of dark skull-shaped energy, and the whole party gets caught in the blast, getting thrown back by the force. Gaze looks around through all the smoke and dust, asking if everyone is okay after that massive blast. Garnon grips his sword tight and yells back that he's barely holding it together against the lick. While Hannah prepares her next spell, shouting that she's attacking again right now and needs her mana restored immediately. Gaze doesn't hesitate for a second, telling her to leave it to him as he pulls out a potion. He winds up and tosses a high-grade mana potion across the battlefield. Using his throwing skill, and the bottle breaks perfectly, splashing both Hannah and Golgan with a huge burst of mana energy. Hannah thanks him for the help, while Golgan admits that Gaze is actually a really reliable guy to have around, so Gaze just stands there with a quiet smile on his face. Taking in the moment, feeling this weird intense sensation in his chest that he can't even describe, and it hits him that this is the very first time the Crescent Claw Party has ever thanked him during a fight. Golan actually says thanks, and Gaze is just standing there, feeling it. The first time he's ever heard those words from them. The lick is still floating there, in the middle of all that smoke and energy. As the monster lets out a loud roar, Gaze watches closely and thinks to himself that everything is going pretty smoothly. He knows that once they stack up enough damage, the lick is going to shift into its next phase, so it'll probably try to fly up and hit them with some big area of effect spell to clear the area. But Gaze keeps his eyes locked on the target, noting that everything is going exactly according to his plan, and the monster is right heading into the weak spot Mia managed to open up earlier. He pulls his weapon back and shouts that he's firing off a magic arrow right now. He combines the arrow with some holy water. The whole thing explodes against the lick's chest. Garth says this is going to strip away the rest of the monster's magic mantle, for good. Golan yells that this is the chance Gaze gave them and tells the team to keep the pressure on, and Lisha agrees. Golgan and Miria move in together, landing a massive combined hit right on the lick's body. And then Hannah swings her staff from the side to pile on even more magic damage, while the monster is reeling. But Ben and Licia stay back on guard with the horses. Watching the group struggle against the monster, Gaze watches the fight with his bow ready, thinking to himself that this thing is way too persistent. He knows if he doesn't end this now, the fight is just going to slowly wear him down until he's got nothing left. thinking about what he needs to do to finish the lick once and for all. Reaching back and grabbing a scroll from his bag, telling himself that he's got no choice but to push himself further. So, Gaze locks in with a look of pure focus, getting ready for one last big move to end it, and he pulls out a holy attribute scroll, using it to enchant his next shot with a ton of holy energy. Gaze starts gritting his teeth as raw magic energy crackles around him. He lets out a pained grunt from the strain of it all. He pulls back his bow and lets a massive holy arrow fly, slamming it directly into the lick with a blinding flash. Gaze yells out that he's using his own body to refine all this magic power, screaming as the energy reaches a breaking point. Miria sees the opening and moves in fast through the chaos, staying low while the light fills the area. And Hannah just stands there completely stunned, watching Gaze pull off something she didn't think was possible. Gaze locks his eyes on the target and yells that he's ending this right now, staring down the monster as he stays totally focused on the shot, his face showing the sheer effort it takes to keep the power steady. He's using the enchantment from that holy attribute scroll to boost his strength, but it's clearly taking a huge toll on him. It's a really reckless move because he's basically sacrificing his own health just to put out this much energy. So, it's basically a double-edged sword at this point, and there's no way his body can keep this up for long. Miria looks completely panicked and yells out Gaze's name as the energy around him hits a peak. The holy arrow finally snaps off the bowstring in a massive blinding burst of light that fills the room. Gazes lets out a huge yell as he fights the recoil of the shot, putting everything he has into the attack. The beam of light travels instantly and slams right into the middle of the lick, and the monster's body starts shattering and breaking into a million pieces under the pressure of the holy magic. Decreen Gaia stands there, heart breathing hard and looking totally spent as the smoke from the explosion starts to settle, while Mia watches with wide eyes and asks if they finally manage to kill it. Artices, but the lick skull starts appearing through the darkness again, looking like it's barely even scratched. The thing lets out a crazy screech that shakes the whole area,